Chapter 385. Indeed, Wang Zhan did not necessarily mean that one would be crowned king based on their talent. In the end, what really mattered was who was more powerful. There was nothing wrong with that at all. Unfortunately, in Jiahua Wuyue's opinion, this was just a quibble. If you don't have enough strength, don't even think about coveting that supreme position. Compared to the Sky Dao Crown Prince, you are far too inferior. Previously, Yuhua Qingyuan had said that he wanted Jiahua Wuyue to fight him like the Sky Dao Crown Prince and Lu Feng. Now, Lu Feng had said something like that. It was undoubtedly too sarcastic. In a moment, his face was distorted, as if he could explode at any time. However, when he remembered that this was Medicine God City, Yuhua Qingyuan forcibly suppressed his anger. Medicine God City was a forbidden land. In this place, except for some special circumstances, even the quasi-life and death quasi-monarch would not dare to make a move casually. Otherwise, they would be resisted by all the alchemists in the universe. Good, very good. Since you say so, I think too highly of you. I look forward to the day when you can really become existences on the same level as me. Then, I can really fight with you on the same level. After saying that, Yuhua Qingyuan turned around and left. Seeing this, Lu Feng smiled mockingly. Jiahua Wuyue, who was beside him, also had a mocking look on his face. When the forest is big, there are all kinds of people. Who would have thought that a monster with the potential of the Divine King would do such a thing? Jiahua Wuyue's face was full of disdain. However, when he saw Lu Feng, he was slightly taken aback. At this moment, Lu Feng was extremely solemn. Wuyue, actually, you are wrong. Jiahua Wuyue was puzzled. I am wrong. Lu Feng nodded gently. Yuhua Qingyuan is right. There is no absolute fairness in this world. After all, cultivation speed is also a reflection of one's talent. Although his talent is not as good as yours, his cultivation speed is faster than yours. When you became a pinnacle martialist, he had already become a god. By the time you became a pinnacle deity, he had already become an almighty in the king realm. This way, I'll suppress you for the rest of your life, making it impossible for you to surpass me. So what if your status is higher than his? So what if your talent is more terrifying than his? In the end, you will always be the loser. In the end, you still lost. Jiahua Wuyue fell silent. If someone else had said this, he would have taken it as a joke, a kind of jealousy towards his own talent. But these words came out of Lu Feng's mouth. If one were to ask who was most qualified to say these words, it would be Lu Feng. It was rumored in the universe that Lu Feng had suppressed the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, who was at the same level as him. But Jiahua Wuyue, who saw everything, knew that Lu Feng wasn't just suppressing the heavenly Tao crown prince, who was at the same boundary. At the last moment, the one who collided with Lu Feng was the heavenly Tao crown prince, who was at the upheaval stage. But even so, at the last moment when the final confrontation erupted, the heavenly Tao crown prince who was at the upheaval stage was still defeated. He even had to forcibly release all his strength to finally defeat Lu Feng. It could be said that the heavenly Tao crown prince's final victory was his greatest failure. And as a monstrous genius to this extent, Lu Feng was the only one who was qualified to say such words. We cultivate not to be invincible in the same realm, but to constantly defy the heavens and finally reach the supreme peak. So, even if you can surpass the 6th, 7th, or even 8th level, so what? You are still lingering in the realm of an ant. No matter how peerless you are, no matter how invincible you are, in front of absolute strength, you are still an ant. And this absolute strength is the realm. Lu Feng deeply felt this. The heavenly Tao crown prince was a monstrous existence at the peak of the 7th level king realm. The heavenly Tao crown prince who had comprehended two types of supreme strength, one quasi-supreme strength, stood at the peak among the countless monstrous geniuses of this era. And Lu Feng, facing the heavenly Tao crown prince who was at the same level, completely suppressed his strength. Even when facing the heavenly Tao Crown Prince who was at the upheaval stage, it was enough to suppress him and make him admit defeat. But, even so, what could he do? Once the heavenly Tao Crown Prince recovered his true power, then he, Lu Feng, would be defeated in an instant, so much so that he would be beaten black and blue, without any temper. This was the difference in absolute strength. No matter what the reason, no matter what the excuse was, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince was stronger than him, stronger than Lu Feng's true strength by 100 times, 1,000 times. It was because of that battle that Lu Feng completely strengthened his belief. It made him determined that he could not go back, that he had to sharpen himself in this endless life and death situation, that he had to make a breakthrough on the verge of sinking into oblivion. Lu Feng left, bringing Lulu with him as he walked forward. Jiahua Wuyue merely stood quietly on the spot. It was a long time later before a smile finally appeared on his unusually silent face. Jiahua Wuyue shook his head gently and muttered to himself, "Looks like it's time to start increasing my strength. The Sacred Lord is right. If I blindly pursue the situation of being invincible among my peers, then I will be the one to fail in the end." He raised his head, wanting to say something to Lu Feng. However, when he looked over, he realized that Lu Feng and Lulu were no longer in front of him. He curled his lips slightly, took out his identification card, and started to contact Lu Feng. 3 days passed just like that. The harvest of these 3 days was also very terrifying. At the very least, not only did Lu Feng know about the traces of the human king realm's first ancestor, but he also obtained a fragment of that ancestor. A fragment of a 9th-grade secret treasure that could allow him to survive under the attack of an almighty king realm expert. This morning, many members of the Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild gathered in front of the room, in the vast living room. At this moment, Wangue was quietly looking at them. When all the members were present, he finally stood up and slowly opened his mouth. "Today is the start of the Grand Assembly. I know that all of you came here to broaden your horizons. In that case, I won't stop you. However, you must remember that you represent the Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild. Therefore, you can't do anything that will lose the reputation of our guild. Do all of you remember?" Everyone gently nodded their heads. Seeing this scene, Wangue nodded with satisfaction. He knew that these people were not perfunctory. Also, in the afternoon, the first climax of the Grand Assembly will be held, which is also the opening battle of the Grand Assembly. Glancing at the 200 over alchemists, Wangue smiled lightly when he saw that they understood. That's right, this is the assessment of the potential of the younger generation of alchemists. This assessment is not divided by race or realm. As long as you are under 100 years old, you can participate. Remember, as long as there is no problem with your age, you can participate. The reward for the final victory is very generous. Hearing Wangue's slightly playful voice, many alchemists laughed. Many grade 3 alchemists were already restless. Although they knew that they had no hope, it was very good to be able to show their faces in front of so many people. Alright, the location of the assessment in the afternoon will be in the Medicine God Square. At that time, if there is anyone who wants to participate, remember to register in advance at noon. Also, in the afternoon, the 4 alchemy grandmasters of the Alchemist Guild will participate in the competition. If you want to show off, remember not to forget. After saying this, Wangue turned around and walked towards the moving track. Lu Feng followed closely behind Wangue. In the afternoon, other people could participate freely, but Lu Feng had to participate. After all, this time, the human race had been able to rise strongly and block all the voices of doubt because of Lu Feng. Lu Feng, in the following rounds, you don't have to participate in the preliminary and semifinals. These rounds are prepared for alchemy apprentices and alchemists below grade 4. After all, if you want to show off, you can't do it casually. Lu Feng nodded lightly. The limit of being under 100 years old might be very big for a martial artist. However, for an alchemist, it was really nothing. Generally, being able to become a Grade 5 alchemy grandmaster before the age of 150 was already considered a peerless genius of an era. Because the number of alchemists was really too small, the chances of a freak appearing was also very, very small. It could be said that the probability of a genius appearing among alchemists was not much different from the probability of a genius appearing among martial artists. Generally, under 100 years old, the furthest one could go on the path of alchemy was only Grade 4. Of course, Grade 4 alchemists were extremely rare and belonged to the category of geniuses. Generally speaking, a genius alchemist could become a Grade 3 alchemist between 50 and 90 years old. As for ordinary alchemists, it depended on luck. A young alchemist like Lu Feng naturally caused the same shock that Ruo Bing had felt back then. Of course, it was because of this that Su Ling had accepted Lulu as his disciple. After all, Lulu was not even 16 years old, but she was already a Grade 2 alchemy grandmaster. Su Ling believed that with his guidance, Lulu could become a Grade 3 alchemist before the age of 20. Although she was not as heaven-defying as Lu Feng, besides Lu Feng, Lulu's achievements were enough to shock the world. Lu Feng, you can stay by my side in a while. I will take this opportunity to introduce you to the higher-ups of the Alchemist Alliance. In Wangui's eyes, Lu Feng was the pinnacle of the human race's power in the future. He was the hope of the human race. Therefore, it was beneficial for the human race to let Lu Feng get in touch with the higher-ups of the Alchemist Alliance. Lu Feng could feel Wangui's intentions. Towards this alchemy grandmaster who was truly dedicated to the human race, Lu Feng also felt admiration from the bottom of his heart. Lu Feng nodded slightly and followed closely behind Wangui. Then, he left the central building directly. After leaving the central building, Lu Feng took out the top-grade aircraft that Wangui had given him. Lu Feng was now a telekinesis master, and he was only a telekinesis grandmaster. It was undoubtedly impossible for a telekinesis grandmaster to fly quickly. Therefore, in order to ensure that his identity would not be guessed, Lu Feng followed those alchemists and took the aircraft. It had to be said that the speed of this top-grade aircraft was terrifying. In terms of small movements, it was even much faster than some perfect stage martialists. Of course, the price of such an enjoyment was also terrifying. It was just a top-notch exclusive aircraft, and the purchase price was no less than 10 million divine item points. This was the total wealth of many peak perfect stage martialists. After coming out, the two of them flew directly to the east of the main building. Lu Feng knew that they were going to the Medicine God Square, which was famous in the foreign battlefield. Sure enough, Lu Feng could already see the existence of the Medicine God Square from afar before he arrived. The Medicine God Square was a legendary place that was far more famous than the Medicine God City. The Medicine God territory had a long history. Before many alchemists had come here, it had been called the Medicine God territory. The reason it had such a name was because of the existence of the Medicine God Square. The Medicine God Square is a cultural relic left behind from the era of elixirs and artifacts. It is the real holy land of alchemists. When it was first discovered, many people were stunned by the ancient records and engravings on it. Lu Feng knew about this. Legend had it that when the Medicine God Square had first been discovered, many people had found some truly shocking elixir recipes on the ancient stone pillars of the Medicine God Square. Moreover, many of the alchemy methods recorded there were truly peerless secret methods that had been lost. Chapter 386. It could be said that this Medicine God Plaza could even be considered the origin of this era's alchemists. The Medicine God Plaza was not called the Medicine God Plaza in the past. In the beginning, it was just a plain. This was transformed by later generations and also to commemorate the lost glory of the alchemy path. It was precisely because of the special significance and existence of this medicine god plaza that almost all important matters related to alchemists would ultimately be held here. When Lu Feng and Wan Gui really arrived at the medicine god plaza, there was already a sea of people here. At a preliminary glance, there were at least tens of millions of people stationed here. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng was slightly shocked. And seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Wan Gui just laughed. Lu Feng, these are all spectators. Many people came to watch these alchemists compete. In order to be able to occupy a good position, they had no choice but to come here a few days in advance. Of course, what you see now is not all of the people. There are still many existences who will only arrive in the afternoon. Generally speaking, the number of people who come at the beginning of each competition will not be less than 100 million. And at the final closing ceremony, when the pinnacle duels, even those pinnacle existences of the various major races will descend. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded lightly. However, he was still shocked by this number of 100 million. He could feel that there were very few ordinary people who came here below. Among them, martial artists occupied almost more than 90%. According to this ratio, once the grand competition began, it was very likely that just the existence of martial artists would exceed 100 million. The foreign battlefield is indeed a place where powerhouses gather. In a daze, Lu Feng seemed to have thought of the past. At that time, on the Cymbidium, the existence of martial artists belonged to the Overlord existence of a planet. But here, just the convening of a grand event attracted at least 100 million martial artists. This kind of number was really too shocking. Even Lu Feng did not dare to be sure whether the number of martial artists of the entire human race added up could be so many. Alright, go down, Lu Feng. Just as Lu Feng was thinking, Wan Gui's figure appeared. At this time, he had already flown down first. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng changed the direction of his flight and flew down. The Divine Medicine Square was the sacred ground of the alchemists. Even Saint Dao alchemists were forbidden from flying here. They had to walk over step by step. Looking at the endless path ahead, Lu Feng finally understood why those people came here so early. Even if you're a martial artist, you still need a lot of time to reach the end. If it were an ordinary person, I'm afraid it would take a few months. Everyone respectfully made way for the two of them as they walked. Although these people didn't know the significance of Wan Gui's master robe, they recognized Lu Feng's alchemy master robe. In this medicine god domain, alchemists could be said to be the most respected existence. Therefore, when they saw Wan Gui and Lu Feng rushing forward, they naturally opened up a path for them. There was still an endless sea of people in front of them, but the two of them weren't ordinary people. Lu Feng's martial artist strength was definitely among the strongest in the perfect peak stage. As for Wan Gui, there was no need to explain. In addition, the audience intentionally or unintentionally opened up a path for them. It didn't take long for them to rush to the front. Lu Feng, these are the stone pillars engraved with some ancient pill formulas from the era of pills and artifacts. Lu Feng nodded gently. His gaze was focused on those stone pillars. The stone pillar wasn't a very exaggerated building. Although it was relatively tall, it was still within Lu Feng's acceptable range. However, Lu Feng could see that there was something extraordinary about this stone pillar. Rather than saying that they were stone pillars, it was better to say that they were engravings of a civilization, a kind of refinement of the essence of an era. President, these stone pillars are really... Lu Feng's eyes became brighter and brighter, and there was a faint color of incomparable excitement. Seeing Lu Feng's expression, Wan Gui also showed a trace of strangeness and shock. Lu Feng, you can see it? Lu Feng nodded gently and said somewhat excitedly. Yes, President, I can see it. It's too great. It's worthy of being the only era in the history of pills and artifacts that can compare to the primitive, immortal devil era. This is really too great, too great. The stone pillars in Lu Feng's eyes were no longer the stone pillars of the past. Countless ancient diagrams appeared on the surface of the stone. These patterns looked calm and didn't have the slightest relationship. However, Lu Feng recognized them. He recognized the meaning of these patterns and veins. Seeing Lu Feng excitedly sizing up the patterns on the stone pillars, Wang Gui was silent for a moment. After a while, he let out a long sigh and said slowly, "Lu Feng, have you come into contact with the pill scripture before?" His arm stiffened slightly. At this moment, an indescribable expression flashed across Lu Feng's face. A strange light appeared in his eyes. The pill scripture. How could he not know about it? How could he not have come into contact with it? Lu Feng still remembered clearly all his experiences on the Gufang star when he had just undergone his transformation. It was there that his bloodline had awakened. It was there that he had seen the omnipotent Futu. It was there that he had seen the shocking scene of the three divine kings suppressing the crack in the void. Of course, it was also there that he entered the final altar of the ancient Fang clan, experienced 9 lives of illusions, and laid the foundation for stepping into the Tao. In the end, he acquired a shocking treasure that could change many, many things. The pill scripture. The pill scripture was one of Lu Feng's greatest secrets. Although it couldn't compare to the existence of the omnipotent Futu, it was still something that only his closest relatives could know about. However, Wang Gui had actually said that Lu Feng had come into contact with the pill scripture. This caused Lu Feng to be truly shocked to the extreme. Silence, endless silence. Wang Gui just looked at Lu Feng strangely and didn't speak for a long time. After an endless silence, Lu Feng's lips curled into a bitter smile. He said softly, "President, how did you know? Could it be because I can understand these patterns?" Wang Gui nodded gently and said slowly, "The patterns on the scripture are special runes condensed during the primordial immortal devil era. In later eras there was simply no existence that could understand them. That was until the emergence of the pill scripture era." Lu Feng was silent as he listened quietly. The pill scripture era was a truly dazzling and prosperous era. It was the era when pills and scriptures were at their peak. For alchemists like us, that was the greatest era. In that era, Grade 7 alchemy grandmasters were rare and there was an endless stream of Grade 8 alchemy grandmasters. Among them, there were even quite a number of Grade 9 alchemy grandmasters. At the end of that era, the greatest alchemy grandmaster in history, the only one who surpassed the divine alchemy grandmasters, was the epic era alchemy grandmaster. He was also one of the 2 greatest ancestors of that era, the ancestor of alchemy. He devoted his life's learning to fuse all the essence of alchemy from the immortal devil era. He united all the Grade 9 alchemy grandmasters, Grade 8 alchemy grandmasters, and Grade 7 alchemy grandmasters of that era. After 10,000 years, he finally condensed the supreme scripture of alchemy, the pill scripture. Hearing this, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with countless strange expressions. He never knew that the alchemy mantra had such an origin. This could be called a world-shaking origin. However, Lu Feng's eyes flashed with a trace of doubt. Although the pill scripture was indeed terrifying, as Lu Feng's understanding of alchemy deepened, he felt that the pill scripture wasn't as terrifying as Wang Gui had described it to be. At the very least, he felt that the pill scripture was indeed a supreme alchemy technique. However, in the end, it wasn't much more than that. The pill scripture was the last miniature of the pill scripture era. It could be said that it was the most precious thing in that great era. Although the great calamity of the universe was terrifying, the pill scripture was preserved. Unfortunately, it seemed that the pill scripture was originally divided into many parts because it was afraid that it would be destroyed together. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood. It wasn't that the pill scripture didn't live up to its name, but that the pill scripture he had obtained was only a part of it. After countless years of accumulation, the Alchemist Alliance found a total of 3 chapters of the Pill Scripture. Although he didn't know how many copies of the Alchemy Scripture there were in total, he was certain that there shouldn't be a lot of copies. After all, the contents of the 3 chapters of the Pill Scripture that we have obtained are enough to surpass the understanding of alchemy saint masters. After saying this, Wangui looked at Lu Feng with an extremely strange expression. However, I didn't expect that the human king's Lu family would actually have a remnant chapter of the Pill Scripture. And you can actually understand the contents of the chapter. After hearing Wangui attribute everything to the human king's Lu family, Lu Feng revealed a strange smile. He knew that this was a misunderstanding. However, he really liked this misunderstanding. This would explain the origin of the remnant chapter of the Pill Scripture. President, is the Pill Scripture very difficult to understand? Lu Feng frowned slightly. In his opinion, the Pill Scripture was far inferior to the primordial scripture and other cultivation methods. Although he had an abnormal Xinyuan and terrifying comprehension talent, Lu Feng understood that his current comprehension ability was not much stronger than a deity's. Compared to those celestial gods, or even the existence of the Void Emperor, there was no comparison at all. They all said that it was difficult to understand, but why did he feel that it was so simple? However, after hearing Lu Feng's words, Wangui smiled. It was a kind of helpless, a kind of gratified, and a kind of stunned smile. The Pill Scripture is a very strange thing. It can be said that it is an ancient book. It can also be said that it has its own soul and is a tool with its own will. If you want to completely comprehend the Pill Scripture, it is impossible to just have comprehension ability. You must obtain its recognition. Once you obtain the recognition of the soul of the Pill Scripture, the difficulty of the Pill Scripture will be greatly reduced. After hearing this strange situation, Lu Feng's eyes lit up. He did not know that there was such a thing. However, Lu Feng quickly accepted this situation. He understood that the soul of the Pill Scripture might have acknowledged him when he ascended the ancient altar and experienced the illusion of 9 lives. Only in this way would he be able to comprehend the contents of the Pill Mantra so quickly. However, I did not expect that you would obtain the recognition of the soul of the Pill Scripture. You have actually comprehended a part of the Pill Scripture's contents. After saying this, Wangui sighed endlessly. The Pill Scripture had been around for countless years in this epoch. It had been around since the beginning of this era. In these countless years, there had been tens of thousands of alchemists. However, there were almost none who could comprehend the Pill Scripture and obtain the recognition of the soul of the Pill Scripture. To be recognized by the soul of the Pill Scripture, one did not need exceptional talent. After all, to be able to become an alchemist, which one of them did not have astonishing talent and comprehension ability. However, none of them had been able to comprehend the Pill Scripture. This proved that to comprehend the Pill Scripture and obtain the recognition of the soul of the Pill Scripture, one did not need talent. What was needed was opportunity and luck. Only then could one truly be recognized by the soul of the Pill Scripture and completely comprehend the contents of the Pill Scripture. Obviously, Lu Feng was such a monstrous person who had both opportunity and comprehension ability. Chapter 387. Lu Feng was silent. There were some things that couldn't be said. Therefore, Lu Feng could only use silence as a replacement. Lu Feng, after this competition is over, I will arrange for you to read the other 3 alchemy scriptures collected by the Alchemist Union. I hope that they will be of some help to you. Lu Feng nodded slightly. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Wangui didn't look excited when he saw Lu Feng's expression. His expression was a little strange, as if he couldn't bear it. After hesitating for a moment, Wangui finally said, Lu Feng, I want you to learn from it. I don't want you to comprehend it. Lu Feng was stunned. He didn't understand what Wangui meant. Actually, Lu Feng, you might not know this. Although the Pill Sutra was very difficult to accept and comprehend, after hundreds of millions of years, after experiencing the comprehension of tens of millions of alchemists, there were still people who had managed to comprehend it. However, they all have a common characteristic. After comprehending one of the alchemy scriptures, it is almost impossible to comprehend the other alchemy scriptures. Since ancient times, there have been tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of alchemists who have comprehended the alchemy scripture. However, only 1,000 of them have managed to comprehend it. Among these 1,000 people, only 7 have been able to comprehend the second alchemy scripture after comprehending the first one. Only 1 has been able to comprehend the third alchemy scripture. He didn't go on, because he already understood why Wangui had such a strange expression. Lu Feng took a deep breath and said indifferently, "It's my fortune to obtain it, but it's my fate to lose it." These simple words caused a complicated look to flash across Wangui's eyes. The way he looked at Lu Feng actually carried traces of shock. Wangui knew that Lu Feng's cultivation level was very high. His state of mind was far beyond what a person his age should have. However, he hadn't expected that Lu Feng's state of mind had already reached such a level. "If I get it, it's my fortune, but if I lose it, it's my fate." These simple words represented a kind of choice. It sounded simple, but it was incomparably difficult to do. Since ancient times, countless existences had fallen on the path of cultivation due to excessive greed. They just didn't understand these 8 words. "Good, very good. Lu Feng, it's really good that you have such an idea. Among the peak of the younger generation, if there's anyone who can comprehend such a realm, then you, Lu Feng, are definitely the least likely. However, I didn't expect that the most unlikely thing would be the most likely." Lu Feng smiled. He understood what Wangui meant. His title was Imperial Monarch, and the meaning of Imperial Monarch was to reign supreme over everything and possess everything. All lands under the heavens belong to the king, and all lands on the shores of the land belong to the king. Everything in the world should belong to the emperor. However, as the emperor, Lu Feng actually comprehended the most impossible choice. This was why Wangui was so shocked. "President, I am the emperor. However, please understand that I am only the emperor on the path of martial Tao. I, Lu Feng, am the emperor of all living things, but I am not the real emperor." Lu Feng's words made Wangui slightly stunned. After a moment, he finally nodded. His eyes were filled with admiration. "You are not the dictator of all living things. You are the emperor on the path of martial Tao. Your martial Tao is the best in the galaxy and invincible in history. Everyone has to submit to you because you are the emperor. However, you are not the real emperor. You don't have the possessiveness of a real emperor. Outside of martial Tao, you are just Lu Feng." This was the real Lu Feng. "Alright, come with me to meet those old friends of mine. You don't have to study the patterns on these pillars." Many tens of thousands of years ago, the Alchemist Alliance had comprehended the Pill Scripture and collected everything that these patterns represented. "If you want to see them, I will give them to you when the time comes." Lu Feng smiled happily. He could feel that these things would be of great use to him. Therefore, Lu Feng really wanted to see them. "Then I will have to trouble you, President," Wangui smiled gently. "No need to thank me. As long as you remember that you are the emperor of the human race." Ignoring the slightly puzzled Lu Feng, Wangui turned around and walked towards a simple hall. This was a simple hall. However, although it was simple, the structure made people speechless. A spatial moving fortress, but it has been transformed into a moving luxurious castle. I'm afraid that only the Alchemist Alliance could have such a shocking move. A spatial moving fortress was also the highest technology of the celestial race. It could be said that this kind of spatial moving fortress was a perfect weapon of war. Although it couldn't be compared to the strongest existence like an interstellar fortress, the value of this thing was still unimaginable. Lu Feng knew that just a random spatial moving fortress like this was worth more than trillions of divine item points. However, the thing that shocked Lu Feng the most was not the existence of the spatial fortress. This was because, even though this thing was more precious than a star fortress, it was still valuable. What shocked Lu Feng the most was the extremely luxurious decorations on the spatial moving fortress. Although these decorations were taken out, they were probably worth more than the spatial moving fortress. Of course, these luxurious decorations were not only to show the wealth of the Alchemist Alliance, but also for safety reasons. Alchemists weren't good at fighting. Although they might be strong, once they encountered an opponent of the same level, they wouldn't have the slightest ability to resist. At that time, the spatial moving fortress would be of great use. There were even 9th-grade divine objects on it. These things were divine objects that even ordinary King Realm experts couldn't damage. With so many things working together, the safety of the Alchemist Alliance had reached a terrifying level. The Alchemist Alliance is indeed the wealthiest organization. When he heard Lu Feng's words, Wangui shook his head gently. The Alchemist Alliance isn't that rich. At the very least, it can't be compared to the human race. It's just that the Alchemist Alliance doesn't have the interests of those races and doesn't have any war organizations to support. In addition, the number of alchemists in the Alchemist Alliance is relatively small. This has led to the Alchemist Alliance's wealth. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. He knew that what Wangui said was true. The Alchemist Alliance was known as the richest organization in the universe. However, compared to the top races, it was still a lot worse. After all, those races had hundreds of millions of people and had various sources of resources. The Alchemist Alliance, which only relied on elixirs, couldn't compare to them. "Let's go in, Lu Feng." When the two of them arrived at the front door, Wangui said. Then, he took the lead and walked in. When he saw Wangui enter, Lu Feng didn't hesitate. He followed closely and stepped in as well. In the center of the entire Medicine God Square, there was no other existence other than the spatial fortress. The surroundings were densely packed with spectators. However, no one entered the center. This was because this was the rule set by the Alchemist Alliance. Here, even those invincible almighties couldn't violate it, let alone these ordinary people. After walking in and looking at everything around, Lu Feng revealed a strange expression. "What's wrong? Are you shocked by the existence here?" At this moment, Wangui's voice sounded. After hearing this, Lu Feng nodded slightly. He was surprised, but not shocked. After all, he had experienced too much and seen too much. There were very few things that could shock him. "I didn't expect it to be like this inside. From the outside, this spatial fortress was about the size of a building. It was in the shape of a cuboid. Below it was about the size of a square. The four sides of the bottom were about 10 kilometers long. This was already terrifying enough. However, when he really entered, Lu Feng discovered the amazing thing about this place. A spatial fortress is one level lower than an interstellar fortress in terms of battle level. However, the cost of building a spatial fortress exceeds that of an ordinary interstellar fortress. The reason for this is that, in addition to being able to travel through time and space, the interior of this spatial fortress is really a spacetime. It's an independent spacetime existence. Having an independent spacetime was something even gods could do. However, that spacetime was just a condensed space. Its size was limited and could not be compared to the spacetime in front of him. Moreover, this was a spacetime condensed by technology. It was a real spacetime. Here, Lu Feng could feel the rich fluctuations of the power of laws. He could feel the existence of all the power that the universe should have. It could be said that a part of the spacetime in the universe was forcefully cut and sent here. Such a scene was horrifying and unbelievable. The spacetime condensed by ordinary gods is just a simple storage space. It's the same for the space warehouses in those spaceships. Only the Void Arch or the ancient virtual king above the 5th level can condense a real space. However, the laws of those spaces are not complete. Unless one has amazing resources and power, it's impossible to build such a space-time. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Back then, his teacher, Dao Songtian, was the principal of the Federal University, one of the 3 major forces of the human race. The resources that he could use were unlimited. However, due to the limitations of his realm, he could only condense a world. What existed here was a real space-time. The biggest difference between space-time and a world was that in space-time, all the laws were complete. If the conditions were good, life could even be born here. The cost is as high as a quadrillion. You should know that this is enough to create a terrifying interstellar army of 10 billion people. And in such an army, there must be an interstellar fortress. However, all these added together only make a spatial fortress that is tens of times weaker than an interstellar fortress. Its true value is reflected here. Just one spacetime was equivalent to the inner world of a virtual king at the 5th level and a Void Arch. This was enough to show its value. Chapter 388. Alright, let's head straight to the area where they are. The laws here have already been changed. As long as you think about it, the distance you need to travel will be shortened countless times, and you will be able to reach there quickly. Lu Feng nodded his head gently. This was a change in the laws. It had been set up by the master of this spacetime, so a new set of laws had appeared in this spacetime. This was the mystery of spacetime. In this spacetime, the master of this spacetime was the strongest. He was the strongest existence that surpassed everything else. A moment later, Wangue started moving. Every step he took covered a distance of 10,000 miles. Lu Feng took a deep breath. His thoughts were the same as his actions. A light step had actually covered a distance of 10,000 miles. This feeling, it feels so good. If Lu Feng unleashed his full power, it would take him a few minutes to cover a distance of 10,000 miles. However, in this place, a light step could cover such a long distance. Lu Feng liked the feeling of having his speed reach the limit. Soon, the two of them finally saw an island. An island. It was an island. It was an island-like existence. It was suspended in the void like a huge boat on the ocean. Lu Feng could sense countless tyrannical auras on it. Of course, these auras were restrained. However, Lu Feng could still sense them. After all, they couldn't be hidden. What shocked Lu Feng the most was the familiar feeling he felt on the island. His eyes narrowed slightly. At the moment, only 3 words were left in Lu Feng's mind. A Dao-accessing being. There was actually a Dao-accessing being here. Lu Feng had also sensed this kind of aura. Lu Feng took a deep breath. He knew that some things could no longer be concealed. He knew that the Dao-accessing being had already sensed his aura and emitted a friendly aura. Therefore, Lu Feng couldn't leave. After following Wangue for a few moments, the two of them finally landed on the island. At the moment, there weren't many people on the island. With a slight sweep, Lu Feng discovered the number of alchemists here. 900 people, there are actually 900 of them. The Alchemist Alliance is indeed terrifying. 900 alchemists shouldn't be too terrifying. There were more than 200 alchemists in the Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild. As the center of the Holy Land for all alchemists, having 900 alchemists wasn't a big deal. However, what shocked Lu Feng was the existence of these alchemists. Compared to the Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild, they were countless times stronger. Because the alchemists here were all great alchemists. There were actually 900 Grandmasters of the Tao of Alchemy here. Grandmasters of Alchemy were existences of the 5th stage at the very least. This was truly too frightening. One should know that there were only 13 Grandmasters in the entire Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild. When Wangue arrived, nearly 900 people noticed him. At that moment, they all put down the matters at hand and looked at Wangue quietly. When Wangue landed on the island, Everyone lowered their heads respectfully and shouted, "Greetings, Master Zhongshe Wangue was an alchemy grandmaster. In the entire universe, he was recognized as one of the 13 great alchemy grandmasters. Even though there were 900 grandmasters of the Tao of alchemy here, those who were inferior to Wangue's status had to pay their respects." Wangue waved his arm gently. When these people saw this scene, they all turned around and continued with what they were doing before. Lu Feng knew that if it wasn't Wangue who had arrived, but any other alchemist, these people wouldn't have bothered with him at all. The hierarchy between alchemists was more obvious than that between martial artists. Wangue walked forward. At that moment, 4 figures slowly walked past him. Seeing them, Lu Feng nodded slightly, then shook his head slightly. He nodded because these 4 people were all alchemy grandmasters. Wangue had already mentioned them before. The center of the Alchemist Alliance was guarded by 4 alchemy grandmasters. These 4 alchemy grandmasters didn't belong to any race or faction. Of course, there were many alchemy grandmasters who didn't belong to any faction. However, they weren't there all year round. Grandmaster Gugue, for example, was someone who liked to take risks and excavate ancient ruins. Therefore, he wasn't in the center of the Alchemist Alliance all year round. These 4 people were all alchemy grandmasters. Only alchemy grandmasters could make Wangue treat them as equals and interact with them. However, Lu Feng shook his head gently again. This was because he had already sensed that, although these 4 people were exceptionally terrifying, none of them was a Tao accessing expert. There was an inexplicable connection between Taoists. If 2 Taoists were to meet each other, then no matter how good one's concealment technique was, it would be impossible to hide. It was the same feeling when 2 peerless geniuses were facing each other. The 4 people also walked towards Wangue. When Wangue saw the 4 of them, he smiled. Lu Feng could clearly sense that this smile came from Wangue's heart. Lu Feng understood that Wangue should have a very good relationship with these 4 people. Of course, if they didn't have a good relationship, Wangue wouldn't have brought Lu Feng along to broaden his horizons. Sure enough, the moment they saw each other, they hugged each other warmly. Lu Feng nodded silently. In the universe, hugging was something only people who were extremely close to each other would do. Wangue, we haven't seen each other for 100 years. I didn't expect that you would still be alive. The first part of the greeting was still full of deep affection. However, the last part of the greeting was completely different. If these 2 people didn't know each other, such a greeting would probably cause some conflict. However, these people had been friends for thousands of years. This was just a special greeting between them. If you 4 old things aren't dead, how can I die? When they heard Wangue's words, they all laughed heartily. There wasn't the slightest bit of ill will between them. After a long time, the laughter stopped. The alchemy master who had spoken earlier looked at Wangue with a sigh. It has been 100 years. Ever since you left the last alchemy conference, you haven't come here again. It seems like what happened back then had a great impact on you. Lu Feng didn't say anything. He just looked at Wangue strangely. They didn't try to hide anything from their conversation just now. He had already heard it. Lu Feng had already guessed what had happened 100 years ago. Besides the matter regarding the race, he really couldn't think of anything else. It seemed like Wangue had suffered a lot for the sake of the human race. Lu Feng clenched his fists as he looked at the unusually silent Wangue. The corners of his mouth curled into a strange smile. For the first time, Lu Feng wanted to show off at the alchemy conference. This wasn't for the human race, but for an old man who had dedicated his entire life to the human race. Wangue, you have to know that the path of an alchemist is about not being distracted. You have spent most of your energy on the race. This has affected your progress too much. Seeing Wangue's silence, one of the alchemy masters couldn't help but speak up. They all understood Wangue's potential. They all knew that if it weren't for the fetters of the race, Wangue might not have been able to become an alchemy master. However, it wouldn't be a problem for him to become one of the top alchemy masters like Su Ling. This time, Wangue didn't remain silent. He raised his head to look at his four old friends and said slowly but firmly, "Our paths are different. In your hearts, the path of alchemy is incomparably important. It surpasses anything else. However, in my heart, the race is the most important thing. In my heart and eyes, the human race is more important than my future and fate." Lu Feng smiled. He really smiled. It was an indescribable smile. It was a smile that came from the bottom of his heart. He could tell that this was Wangue's heartfelt words. This was what this alchemy master truly hoped for. Lu Feng was both shocked and touched by this. He knew that if the human race didn't have such an existence who was willing to give up everything for the human race, it wouldn't have been possible. In just 10,000 years, the human race wouldn't have been able to reach a level that made billions of races tremble in fear. The four alchemy masters sighed deeply when they saw Wangue's calm and resolute smile. However, they didn't try to persuade him anymore. They all knew Wangue's character. They knew that once this good friend of theirs decided on something, he would never change his mind. "Wangue, this is the member of the human race's demon race, right?" At that moment, all their gazes were focused on Lu Feng. The situation of Lu Feng's test previously was already completely known by these people. After all, the alchemy masters in charge of the test were all alchemy masters of the Alliance. Furthermore, Wangue had said that the alchemy masters could explain everything to the alchemy masters of the Alliance. When he heard this, an unconcealable look of pride appeared on Wangue's face. He walked over to Lu Feng's side and said, "That's right, this is the unrivaled demon of the human race. He is the foundation of the human race's revival." Photo. Before they could say anything, Wangue pointed at a few people and said, "Photo, these people are the four elders of the Alchemy Master Alliance." Lu Feng nodded his head gently and bowed respectfully to these people. He knew that the 13 Alchemy Masters should be the elders of the 13 Alchemy Master Alliance. Wangue pointed at the four people and introduced them one by one. They are Grandmaster Tianhui, Grandmaster Wan Yuan, Grandmaster Taradas, Grandmaster Yingtika. Every time Wangue introduced someone, Lu Feng bowed respectfully. They were all true apex existences. In the future, they would all be key figures in the revival of the human race. Plus, they definitely had the right to earn Lu Feng's respect. After the introductions, Lu Feng stood to the side again. At this moment, the four alchemy grandmasters all looked at Lu Feng with strange expressions. After a long while, Elder Tarada sighed and said slowly, "He is indeed a demon. At the beginning, if the 7 alchemy masters hadn't guaranteed it, I wouldn't have dared to believe that such a demon existed." They were right. He is indeed a demon. A terrifying demon that will shock the universe. Chapter 389. Tarada sighed deeply. This was the first time he had seen such a freak. After all, he had become a Grade 4 alchemy master when he was only a telekinesis grandmaster. This was the first time he had heard of or seen such a person. "Looks like you're really going to give those old bastards a good slap in the face this time," Lin Fan said with a smile. Grandmaster Wan Yuan nodded gently and said, "Indeed. With such a freak around, I'm afraid that the winner of this year's youth competition will be completely overshadowed. There was only one winner of the youth competition every 100 years. However, an alchemy freak like Lu Feng had never appeared in this era. There was no need to compare the two of them." Grandmaster Tianhui walked up to them and looked at Lu Feng gently. Finally, he nodded and said slowly, "This child is not bad. He is really not bad. It is no wonder that Master thinks so highly of him." Hearing this, the 3 grandmasters nodded their heads lightly. As for Wangue, he revealed a weird expression. "Did you say that he is a teacher? Could he be your teacher?" "It's the Alliance Master. He's back? Teacher. The teacher of the 4 alchemy grandmasters. Adding on the fact that Wangui had called out His Highness Alliance Master, Lu Feng could already guess who it was. He took a deep breath. His gaze had already passed these people, and looked behind them. Lu Feng finally understood who the hidden person was. Yes, he had heard that there were Tao-accessing alchemists in the Alchemy Master Alliance. There was more than one of them. One of them was the Alliance Master of the Alchemy Master Alliance, one of the 3 Sacred Path alchemists, Alchemy Saint Rong. Lu Feng could already confirm that the Tao-accessing alchemist in the mobile spatial fortress was the real Alliance Master of the Alchemy Master Alliance. When they saw Wangui's excited expression, the few alchemy grandmasters smiled faintly. They also didn't know why the Alliance Master would suddenly appear here today. However, the appearance of the Alliance Master, who had been in hiding for many years, and even intended to attend this year's Alchemy Master Conference, was already shocking news. Alliance Master, he is here. Futu, go ahead. The Alliance Master wants to see you. Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded without hesitation. After bowing respectfully to the few people, he finally walked inside. Lu Feng understood that what he had just passed through was a space displacement domain. He was no longer in the spatial mobile fortress. Now it was another world, or rather, an inner space. Lu Feng already knew. He already knew the existence of this Saint Tao Grandmaster and how terrifying of an expert he was. That was definitely an ethereal great emperor. He was even stronger than his teacher, Dao Songtian, by far. In front of Lu Feng was a world of divine objects. The divine objects piled up here were all existences that could shock the world. Among them, there were many that Lu Feng did not recognize. However, among the few that he could recognize, the worst one belonged to the category of 8th-grade divine objects. In the center of the world of divine objects there was a thatched house. An old man stood quietly in front of the thatched house, looking at Lu Feng with a smile. Finally, when Lu Feng walked closer, he slowly opened his mouth. "You are here." Lu Feng nodded his head lightly. "I am here." There was no monstrous Lu Feng here, nor was there any Saint Tao Alchemist Alliance's Alliance Master. There were only 2 equal and ordinary existences here. They were both Tao Treants. Looking at Lu Feng's incomparably silent face, Saint Pill Master Rong sighed softly with an endless feeling of vicissitudes. "I never thought that such a monstrous genius would appear in my path of alchemy. He is a spirit grandmaster and a 4th-grade pill master. Moreover, he entered the Tao at such a young age. Your real name is not Futu, but Lu Feng, right? You are the Emperor Lu Feng, right?" Lu Feng did not reveal any expression of shock. In fact, he did not even show the slightest expression. He raised his head slightly and looked at Saint Pill Master Rong. His tone was unusually calm as he asked, "How did you know?" Saint Pill Master Rong smiled faintly. He slowly said, "I should know. Because Saint Pill Master Lu and I are friends." Saint Pill Master Lu, the Saint Pill Master of the Lu family, one of the 3 great Saint Tao alchemists in the world. After hearing this explanation, Lu Feng nodded his head slightly. However, he soon shook his head. "However, this does not mean that you should know who I am. After all, I have the Saint Clan's birth chart secret technique. You shouldn't be able to recognize me if I use my birth chart secret technique." Saint Pill Master Rong laughed. There was a unique aura of friendliness in his voice. "Of course, this is not the reason why I recognized you. However, you can hide it from others, but you can't hide it from me. This is because I already know a lot about you. Actually, you don't need to know anything else. Just one thing is enough. That is, a person who has entered the Tao." Lu Feng nodded his head in realization. Indeed, those who could enter the Tao were the true peerless figures in the universe. They were all heaven-defying geniuses who grew up to become giants. Lu Feng could count the number of people who had entered the Tao with his fingers. In the Lu family's pure land of bliss, the 4 old ancestors he met were all people who had entered the Tao. Apart from these 4, only his teacher, Dao Songtian, was a person who had entered the Tao. It was too difficult for someone who had entered the Tao to appear. As for Lu Feng, he had entered the Tao at a young age. It could even be said that he had not appeared before the world. Therefore, just based on the fact that he was a person who had entered the Tao, he could accurately identify Lu Feng's identity. That's right. I am Lu Feng, Emperor Lu Feng. Since he had already been exposed, there was no point in continuing to hide it. Seeing Lu Feng admit it so readily, Alchemy Saint Rong also revealed a faint smile. Not bad, really not bad. You are indeed a monstrous existence in this era that can make billions of races tremble in fear. Emperor Lu Feng, the one who started the Battle of the Kings. In a battle of the same level, he completely suppressed the heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who was at the peak of the 7th level. He is said to be the monster closest to the Emperor realm in this Battle of the Kings. Lu Feng was expressionless when he heard these praises. His face was still as indifferent as ever. Then, what is your attitude? What is your attitude? After knowing Lu Feng's identity, what are you going to do? Do you want to kill me, or do you want to show some other attitude? At this moment, Lu Feng was facing this terrifying existence who had already reached the Void Dharch realm. However, he did not feel the slightest bit of fear. Lu Feng was calm. He was unbelievably calm. Seeing Lu Feng's current appearance, Alchemist Saint Rong had a look of approval in his eyes. He nodded lightly and said slowly, "Ever since I entered the battlefield, I have heard the most legends. In this era, the most famous person is you, Emperor Lu Feng. At the start, I was curious. I was curious about the person that my old friend asked me to look for. I was curious about this emperor who could stir up the winds and clouds of time and space. I was curious about what kind of existence he was. Now I have finally seen him." Lu Feng smiled slightly, but there was no humility in his expression. "You are not disappointed, right? Other people would say that they were humble. However, Lu Feng was never humble. He never knew what humility was. All his glory was bestowed upon him by himself. He did not need others to bestow it upon him. This was the true glory of a king. Therefore, Lu Feng never knew what humility was in front of someone of the same level as him. His strength was not something that anyone could compare to. Alchemy Saint Rong laughed heartily when he heard Lu Feng's reply. However, his smile was just like that of an ordinary old man. He nodded lightly. There was a look of approval in his eyes. "That's right. I am not disappointed. I am not disappointed at all. You are known as the Emperor. Although you have not reached the great success stage, the majesty that belongs to you is still there. It will not wither away. Entering the Tao at a young age, the path to becoming an emperor. I cannot think of anyone in this world who can compare to you. Only an emperor like you can revive everything. Only then can you step into the true peak of the world." Entering the Tao at a young age meant that one's cultivation speed surpassed everything else. This was the terrifying speed of cultivation. Furthermore, those who had entered the Tao were recognized by the heavens and earth. They were protected by the karma of time and space. It was almost impossible for anyone who had entered the Tao to die. For someone like Lu Feng who had entered the Tao at a young age, his fate and providence had probably reached an unfathomable level. It was too difficult to kill him. This also ensured the safety of those who had entered the Tao. As for the path to becoming an emperor, it made Lu Feng truly invincible among the younger generation. All the land under the heavens belonged to the emperor. All the people on the land were the emperor's subjects. All existences had to be restrained by Lu Feng. They had to be suppressed by him. This was the true emperor. This was the path to becoming an emperor. With the most terrifying cultivation speed and the greatest potential, Lu Feng was destined to have no opponents in this era. Lu Feng, you are not bad. You are really outstanding. You're the last hope of this era. Lu Feng was filled with doubts. He did not know what alchemy Saint Rong meant. When he wanted to ask, he realized that one of the 3 most respected alchemists in the world had completely disappeared. There was no trace of him in the straw hut. It was as if this person had never appeared in this world. Lu Feng took a deep breath. Although he did not know the meaning of Sacred Alchemist Rong's last sentence, he had an indescribable feeling after Sacred Alchemist Rong said it. It was as if Sacred Alchemist Rong's words were a prophecy. A space-time crack had appeared behind him unknowingly. Lu Feng knew that as long as he stepped out of this place, he would be able to return to the original universe, to the battlefield in the foreign domain, and to the mobile fortress. Lu Feng turned around and took one last look at this strange inner world. He did not stay any longer and stepped into the space-time crack. Chapter 390. No wonder you think so highly of him. Indeed, his potential is really shocking. When Lu Feng's figure completely disappeared, 2 figures quietly appeared in front of the spatial crack. If Lu Feng did not leave, he would definitely be able to recognize these 2 people. One of them was Pil Saint Rong. As for the other one, Lu Feng was even more familiar with him. That was because he was called Tu Tianxin. Tu Tianxin had finally appeared. After receiving news about Lu Feng, he had finally arrived at the battlefield in the outer region. Hearing Pil Saint Rong's praise, Tu Tianxin revealed a strange smile. It was a kind of happiness, a kind of excitement, and even a faint sadness. Yes, he is very outstanding. Compared to him, he is even more outstanding. Pil Saint Rong knew who the him that Tu Tianxin was talking about was. He knew that him had become Tu Tianxin's taboo after that incident. This is also a kind of compensation. After all, you have lost such an outstanding him, and gained Lu Feng, who is even more unfathomable. This is the best compensation. With such a disciple, your soul has found a new place to reside in. Hearing this, Tu Tianxin's eyes were filled with pride. However, there was more of an indescribable pain. He took a deep breath. At this moment, Tu Tianxin finally recovered slowly. He looked at the spatial crack where Lu Feng had disappeared and was strangely silent. Seeing this, Pil Saint Rong did not try to persuade him. He only said softly but fiercely, "This time, many old fellows have already woken up and formed an undying alliance with me. No matter what, before Lu Feng grows up, we will not let such a thing happen to him. Absolutely not." A cold glint flashed across his eyes. At this moment, Pil Saint Rong's eyes also flashed with a cold light. This was completely different from the kind old man from before. It could even be said that they were 2 extremes. Actually, this should be Pil Saint Rong's true appearance. After all, he was the soul and core of a top organization in the universe. How could he be so gentle? No need. Just as Alchemy Saint Rong was thinking about how to pave the way for Lu Feng, Tu Tian's voice suddenly rang out. Hearing this, Alchemy Saint Rong was slightly stunned. He looked at Tu Tianxin and did not understand why Tu Tianxin would say such a thing. Tu Tianxin didn't even look at the alchemist. At this moment, he actually smiled mysteriously. "You don't understand Lu Feng. He was the emperor. He had to walk his own path. Endless killing and blood, eternal war and death, a fallen world, the edge of destruction, the power of life and death, the abyss of pain. This is what an emperor should experience. Your help will only make him lose his way. He will never be able to find the path that belongs to the emperor." Hearing this, Alchemist Saint Rong fell silent for a moment. A moment later, he gently nodded. At this moment, Tu Tianxin's voice was heard again. "Lu Feng's life providence is innately noble. His background was incomparable to anyone else's. He was born to be the emperor. He was destined to be. Perhaps many people think that Lu Feng's strength is due to the existence of his bloodline. However, I want to say that the bloodline of the human king is not Lu Feng's help. It is Lu Feng's shackles. This bloodline will eventually become the shackles of his supreme peak. In a trance, Tu Tianxian seemed to recall the words that Lu Feng had once said in the massacre abyss, "Enemies of all heavens." In order to surpass the human king and reach the supreme peak, he was even willing to face the enemies of all heavens. What kind of madness was this? What kind of terror was this? What kind of incomprehensible boldness and courage? No one is to interfere with Lu Feng's growth. I will not make the same mistake a second time. Lu Feng is an existence destined by the heavens. He will not die so easily. No one can really make him die. Therefore, there is no need for you to pave the way for him. You just need to control the supreme existences of those pinnacle races and make it impossible for them to casually descend and kill Lu Feng. Lu Feng's strength was destined by fate. However, the Supreme Divine King was a terrifying existence that could change fate. Back then, Lu Tao's luck was so exuberant that it almost suppressed the entire universe's younger generation to the point that they could not raise their head. He even condensed the luck of those geniuses and turned it into a terrifying blessing when he broke through. It was also because of this reason that Lu Tao could grow from a 6th-stage monstrous genius to a 7th-stage monstrous genius. However, it was this kind of monstrous genius that was destined to become the Divine King that the Nether King took action and broke his path to becoming the Divine King. The Divine King's power was indescribable. Therefore, in order to ensure that Lu Feng had the chance to reach the supreme peak, they had to guard against the possible actions of the Divine King. Supreme Divine King, if he descends, I am not afraid at all. After all, I am also a heavenly emperor. Alchemy Saint Rong was a heavenly emperor. Although a heavenly emperor was also a heavenly emperor, everyone understood that a heavenly emperor's existence was a supreme existence that could kill a heavenly emperor. Who would have thought that in the Alchemy Alliance, which focused on medicinal pills, one of the 3 strongest people in the alchemy Dao in the world would actually be a heavenly emperor? Back then, when I first met Lu Feng, I felt that he was special. I felt that he seemed to have peerless potential. However, compared to those monstrous geniuses, this potential was far too lacking. However, after fighting with him, I suddenly realized that although his talent back then was not the most terrifying, he had a possibility that others could never compare to. That was his heart. Lu Feng had the strongest heart that no one else could compare to. A month later, he returned from Dao Songtian. However, after returning, he had already entered the Dao. Entering the Dao at a young age, you should be able to understand what this means. However, what shocked me was not over yet. During the 3 months of special training for him, I watched as he made breakthroughs and became stronger. From a genius, he slowly rose to a monstrous genius, to an Emperor Dao monstrous genius, to an Emperor Dao monstrous existence, to a King Dao monstrous genius. The speed of his improvement shocked me. It was unimaginable. After that, when I went to the capital administrative planet to meet that old friend, I heard that he had been captured by the Divine King. However, I could feel that Lu Feng would not be in danger. The so-called danger was only an opportunity for him to transform. As expected, my guess came true. When the news came again, Lu Feng had already become the most promising person in the younger generation. At the same level, he suppressed the crown prince of the heavenly Dao and even started the Battle of the Kings. He became the #1 Battle of the Kings in this era. At this point, a proud expression appeared on Tu Tianxian's face. Lu Feng did not say anything, and he did not mention anything either. However, in their hearts, they had already tacitly agreed to this master-disciple relationship. Lu Feng was his disciple. How could he not be proud to have such a disciple? Other than those 3 months, I have never given him any help. Similarly, the Lu family is the same. However, even so, he still reached such a level. Therefore, what he needs is not protection at all. Lu Feng is a real monstrous genius. He is an invincible monstrous genius who will become a new emperor. We do not need to pave everything for him. What we need to do is to wipe out all the giant hands that break the rules for him. That is enough. Seeing Lu Feng suddenly appear in front of everyone, they all looked at him. The 7th grade alchemy grandmasters did not feel the slightest bit strange. They felt it when Lu Feng left. These people all knew that Lu Feng had been transferred to another spacetime by Alchemy Saint Rong. Therefore, his return naturally did not cause any commotion or surprise. Futu, you are back. Seeing Lu Feng appear, Wangui had already walked forward. Although he was still full of smiles, Lu Feng could clearly see the slight anxiety in his eyes. Lu Feng also understood Wangui's thoughts. Alchemy Saint Rong was an alchemy saint and the leader of the Alchemy Alliance. He did not belong to any faction. However, Lu Feng was not simple either. If Lu Feng was just an ordinary alchemy grandmaster, it might not be a big deal. However, Lu Feng was not an ordinary alchemy grandmaster. He was not Futu. His true identity was the founder of the War of the Kings. He was the #1 figure in the War of the Kings. As for Lu Feng, he was the hope of the human race. Therefore, Wangui was so nervous. Lu Feng nodded slightly at Wangui and revealed a relaxed smile. I met the Alliance leader. He is a very good person. He was a good person, really a good person. After all, he was someone who was willing to help him. Such a person was a good person. Hearing this, the light in Wangui's eyes dimmed slightly. At this time, Grandmaster Taratus also walked over. Alright, Futu is also back. I think the competition is about to start. This time, whether or not we can slap those people in the face will depend on you, Futu. The 5 independent territories were Medicine God Territory, Wind God Territory, Darkness Territory, Lava Territory and Heaven Giant Territory. Each of the 5 territories had a great alchemy grandmaster guild. Medicine God Territory's alchemy grandmaster guild belonged to the center of the alliance. However, the other 3 territories belonged to 3 different pinnacle overlord races. In the beginning, it was not a big deal. However, as the Wind God Territory became too strong, the 3 great alchemy grandmaster guilds gradually came together and began to suppress the Wind God Territory. Of course, if that was the case, the Medicine God Territory's Alchemy Grandmaster Guild would not say anything. They would not deliberately resent the 3 great Alchemy Grandmaster Guilds because of their friendship with Wangui. Unfortunately, the ambition of the 3 great Alchemy Grandmaster Guilds was not just limited to the Wind God Territory's Alchemy Grandmaster Guild. Their target was the entire Alchemy Grandmaster Alliance. Although the Alchemy Grandmaster Alliance was not good at fighting, they were not fools. However, they were definitely not fools. Naturally, these people felt the intentions of the 3 independent alchemists. Therefore, these alchemy grandmasters of the Alchemy Grandmaster Guild supported the Wind God Territory's Alchemy Grandmaster Guild from the bottom of their heart. Hearing Taratus's words, Wangui turned to look at Lu Feng. As for Lu Feng, he smiled confidently. Unless there is a 5th stage alchemist among them, I am not afraid of anyone. This was Lu Feng's confidence. Although he had just passed the test of a 4th stage alchemist, Lu Feng, who had comprehended the alchemy scripture and possessed a strange power, was full of confidence. He believed that as long as the other party did not refine a 5th stage alchemy pill, then he would definitely win with a strong momentum. Seeing Lu Feng brimming with confidence, the few of them also revealed happy smiles. Although they had not been in contact for long, these people could feel Lu Feng's character. They were sure that Lu Feng was not a person who spoke empty words. As long as he said it, it meant that he had enough confidence. I hope that Futu can surprise us. After all, the three great alchemy grandmaster guilds are getting more and more outrageous. Chapter 391. The Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering had already begun. In every corner of the Medicine God City, there were many alchemists and even alchemy grandmasters. They walked out of their own areas and publicly imparted some alchemy knowledge. Then, many alchemists who came here to exchange knowledge would also appear and have a certain degree of exchange. During the Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering, as long as there was a problem, one could ask the alchemists and grandmasters of the Alchemy Masters Guild. They would solve it for free. Of course, if there was a problem that even they couldn't solve, the alchemy grandmasters would step in. During the Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering, all kinds of divine items would appear and be publicly auctioned. Because this was the time when the number of alchemists was the highest in the entire universe, the items auctioned at this time would usually fetch the highest price. Medicine God City, which was larger than a second-grade life planet, was filled with living beings from all kinds of races. Although the number of alchemists and businesses here was terrifying, it was still only a small portion of the total population. More than 99% of them were here to watch the Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering. In the eyes of many people, even the strong ones, alchemists were extremely mysterious and noble existences. Being able to have a chance to get close to them was an extremely rare opportunity for most people. Of course, there was another reason that attracted so many people here. After the Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering had been held for some time, many alchemists would publicly refine pills here to verify their thoughts. Many of the pills that they refined would be sold directly. This way, many people who had money but didn't have the means to buy them would have a chance. The first day of the Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering was in full swing. Of course, the main event wasn't these. Everyone knew that there were three climaxes in every Alchemy Masters' Grand Gathering. The first one was the competition for the younger generation. This was a competition that represented the future of alchemists and was something that everyone was worried about. The second one was during the middle part of the competition. All the grandmasters would appear and give lectures for a day. For non-alchemists, it was meaningless. However, for alchemists, this was an opportunity that they could only dream of. And the third climax was the final conclusion, the showdown between peak stage alchemists. Undoubtedly, this was the most important event. Both alchemists and non-alchemists would go crazy over it. Today was the first day, and the main event of the first day was the competition of the younger generation. This was the highlight of the show that everyone loved. Unfortunately, very few people actually went to the Divine Alchemist Square. Unless one was in existence at the level of a warrior, no one would go there to watch. Most of the ordinary people were watching everything in front of the three-dimensional projection walls set up in Medicine God City. Seeing that there were already a lot of people gathered outside, the Alchemist Alliance's four great alchemy masters didn't delay any longer. Seeing that it was already noon, they all walked out of the spatial fortress. At this moment, everyone was silent. However, a moment later, there was endless jubilation. The few of them waved their hands slightly in greeting. Then, they stepped into the void and walked into midair. In this place, they were the only ones who could stand. Apart from these alchemy grandmasters, no one else could receive such treatment. Wan Gui didn't follow the four of them. Even though his status and strength were the same as theirs, this was Medicine God City. He had to show his respect to the owner of the city. They were lagging behind a little. Then, the four great alchemy grandmasters used their spiritual power to create an illusion in the void to create a real grandstand. The grandstand floated quietly in midair. It was unusually eye-catching. Then, Taradas stood up and glanced at the crowd with a solemn smile on his face. Next, let's welcome the presidents of the four great alchemy guilds, the elders of the four great alchemy alliances, and the four great alchemy grandmasters. At this moment, the atmosphere of the entire place was heated up again. Countless people stood up and cheered at the sky. Among the crowd, the 4 great alchemy grandmasters walked into the void quietly, just like the 4 great alchemy masters of the 4 great alchemy alliances. In an instant, the 8 great alchemy grandmasters sat on the grandstand in the void at the same time. In an instant, the majesty of the heavenly masters was released, sweeping across everything. Many warriors had a look of worship on their faces. The 8 great alchemy grandmasters were the 8 great heavenly masters. The existence of the heavenly masters was a terrifying almighty that was comparable to the virtual king. It could also be said that the 8 great heavenly masters were the 8 almighty kings. However, it didn't seem like everything was over. The number of people who came to this year's alchemy conference might not be the largest in history. However, he was destined to be the most famous one in recent years. The 8 great alchemy grandmasters hadn't even sat down when a figure appeared in the void. He walked quietly in the void. However, when everyone's eyes were focused on him, a second and third figure appeared in the void. Many people fell silent when they saw this scene. The void was an absolute forbidden zone. No one was allowed to set foot here. Otherwise, it would be a provocation to the Alchemy Alliance. However, at this moment, there were actually 3 existences walking through the void without the slightest scruple, disregarding everything as they came to this place. Just as everyone was silent, the 8 great alchemy grandmasters suddenly stood up. However, when they saw their expressions, many people seemed to understand something, and a touch of excitement appeared in their eyes. This was because although there was disgust and coldness on the faces of the 8 great alchemy grandmasters, there was no unfamiliar expression. Furthermore, many of the grandmasters had joyful looks on their faces. At this moment they all understood. The 3 people who had arrived were definitely qualified to walk in the void. The only people who were qualified to walk in the void were the alchemy grandmasters. Another 3 alchemy grandmasters? Those who could come were all experts, and they were all existences above the martial arts realm. Such existences were naturally not idiots. Therefore, they quickly understood the situation. At this moment, there was an endless silence. This was a scene that no one had expected. There were 13 great alchemy grandmasters in the universe. These 13 great alchemy grandmasters belonged to the Alchemy Alliance, but this didn't mean that all 13 of them would be present. On the contrary, the probability of a grandmaster appearing at the alchemy conference was very small, especially in recent years. There were almost no alchemy grandmasters appearing. In the previous alchemy conference, only one of the 4 great alchemy grandmasters of Medicine God City had appeared, and only 3 alchemy grandmasters from the 4 independent alchemy guilds had attended. To have 8 grandmasters appear in this alchemy conference was already the highest number of grandmasters in recent years. However, they didn't expect that there would be alchemy grandmasters. There were actually 3 alchemy grandmasters. 11 alchemy grandmasters. There are actually 11 alchemy grandmasters. There are only 13 in the entire universe. Other than those 2 incomparably mysterious grandmasters, almost all the alchemy grandmasters that could appear have appeared. This alchemy conference was indeed the right time to come. The appearance of the alchemy grandmasters meant that they would give lectures for a day. The previous alchemy conference was 4 days, and this alchemy conference was 11 days. This was definitely a shocking wealth for many alchemists. Seeing the 3 people walking over, the 8 alchemy grandmasters all went up to greet them at the same time. Su Ling, Gu Gui, Huang Yi, I didn't expect that you guys would really come. The surprise on Taradis's face could not be concealed. He knew that Su Ling could come because Su Ling had already gone to the Alchemy Conference Center to look for them. And Gu Gui could also come to participate. This was something that no one expected. When Gu Gui first came, he only said that he wanted to help his disciple appraise himself. As for this alchemy conference, he would not participate. But who would have thought that Gu Gui would come in the end? As for the last alchemy grandmaster, these people did not expect him to come. Because before, Grandmaster Huang Yi did not say that he would come. His appearance could be said to be the biggest surprise. However, being able to gather 11 alchemy grandmasters this time was something that made many people surprised and excited. Soon, there were 3 more seats in the void, making it a total of 11. This was the largest gathering in recent decades. Taratus once again stood out. In the present world, there were 3 great 7th-grade alchemy grandmasters. They were the closest to becoming a saint master. Everyone understood that if a Pil Dao sacred master could appear, then it could only be one of these 3 people. These 3 people were the human race's Su Ling Grandmaster, Grandmaster Hibiscus who had not yet arrived, and Elder Taratus of the Alchemy Conference Center. Although Taratus was not the strongest of the 4 grandmasters of the Alchemy Conference, he had the most authority. He was practically the number 1 elder of the Alchemy Conference. After all, this was the Alchemy Conference. What mattered here was not one's martial strength, but one's alchemy strength. As the number 1 elder of the Alchemy Conference, it was most appropriate for Taratus to speak. When he scanned the audience, the noisy world instantly became incomparably quiet. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng nodded gently. He knew that this was prestige. After a satisfied smile, Grandmaster Taratus said slowly, "There are actually 11 alchemy grandmasters in this alchemy conference. This is something I did not expect." Taratus was not the only one who did not expect this. The 10 alchemy grandmasters in the void were probably not the only ones who did not expect this. However, this is still a good thing. I don't need to say anything more. What we are about to begin is the main theme of the Alchemy Conference. This is the Young Alchemy Conference, which symbolizes the development of future alchemists. I will set up 100 arenas in the void and let 100 alchemy grandmasters act as examiners. They will carefully evaluate the participants in each arena. In the end, the strongest person in each arena will be selected to enter the void arena and participate in the semifinals. The semifinals will be personally presided over by the 11 alchemy grandmasters. As for the finals, the same rules apply. We will decide at the end. Alright, let's begin. The moment he finished speaking, Taratus waved his arm gently. In that instant, over 100 arenas condensed from the void appeared in the void. After seeing that the stage had taken shape, all the people who were preparing for the assessment rushed towards it like crazy. One arena was enough to accommodate over 100 alchemists taking the test at the same time. Normally, when one arena was full, the participants would enter another arena. However, it was clear that the number of participants present was far more than 10,000. Thus, in order to be able to take the test earlier, these people hurriedly rushed to the arenas. Looking at the chaotic scene below, Wan Gui smiled gently and shook his head. Taratus, you guys are still the same. You haven't changed year after year. I am convinced when I see this scene. I say, can't you just make it a number or something? This chaos is really unbearable. Taratus smiled helplessly and said slowly, it's not like you don't know the rules of the Alchemy Union. Anyone who can come here is a true alchemy grandmaster or an alchemy apprentice. It's the same for the staff here. If they have the time, they would be busy comprehending the path of alchemy. Who would have the time to do this? Chapter 392. Wangue smiled speechlessly. He knew about this too. Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild Hall was the same. However, Wangue couldn't help but say a few words every time he saw such a scene. Forget it. There's no point in talking about this. Let's watch the next alchemist's assessment. Hearing this, everyone gently nodded their heads. In fact, the younger generation's grand competition wasn't worth watching. After all, the younger generation was under 100 years old. Most of these alchemists were alchemist apprentices. Alchemists below Grade 5 alchemy grandmasters didn't need alchemy recipes to refine pills. Such an alchemy competition wasn't worth watching. However, among the younger generation, there would always be a few amazing figures. It was also because of this that so many people came to watch. Soon, all the 100 arenas were full. Even so, there were still many people who hadn't taken the assessment. Therefore, Taradas soon announced that the others would take the assessment after the 100 arenas were over. In the 100 arenas, all kinds of mental power rose at the same time. Although it couldn't be seen, the vague feeling was still shocking. Moreover, these mental powers weren't just being released. They wanted to refine medicinal pills. The scene of tens of thousands of people refining pills at the same time could only be seen in the younger generation's grand competition. This was also one of the reasons why so many people came to watch. Many existences were quietly watching the sky. They were watching the alchemy masters and alchemy apprentices, who were continuously using their enormous mental energy to draw countless runes in the hundreds of arenas. Perhaps for now these were just alchemists or alchemist apprentices. However, everyone knew that this was only temporary. After a period of time, when all these people grew up, they would definitely become the true pillars of the alchemist path in the future. It could be said that these people were the powerhouses of the alchemist branch in the future. Alchemy grandmasters and even alchemy grandmasters might appear here. And this was the other main reason why everyone came here. Looking at the young alchemists refining pills in the sky, a perfect stage martialist transmitted his voice to another perfect stage martialist beside him. I wonder who will be the final winner this time. After hearing his transmission, the perfect stage martialist pondered for a moment and said slowly, "If it was in the past, it wouldn't be difficult to guess. After all, the recent champions were the young alchemists of the 4 independent territories. Among them, the underworld race is most likely to be the winner." He nodded slightly, knowing that his companion was right. In the last 2 years, the underworld race's prides had won the final championship. Those 2 people seemed to be the disciples of the underworld alchemy grandmaster Yuanling. This time, Grandmaster Yuanling brought along his 3rd disciple. Legend has it that this youngest disciple of his is the one with the best talent, and is also where all of Yuanling's hopes lie. According to the previous situation, Grandmaster Yuanling's youngest disciple should be the one with the most hope. After all, he's known as the best. But this time, it's not like that. I heard from some friends that the Alchemy Alliance is dissatisfied with the 4 independent territories, especially the 3 territories other than the Wind God territory, so they're sending their disciples this time. Hearing this, the perfect stage martialist's eyes flashed. He looked at his companion with a slightly strange expression and continued to transmit his voice. "Do you think the Alchemy Alliance and Medicine God City will send their disciples? You have to know that they haven't sent anyone to participate in this competition for many years. The resources the Alchemy Alliance controlled were too terrifying. Although the 3 independent territories' Alchemy Alliance had been very strong in recent years, but they were just a little bit stronger. To be honest, the difference between them and the Medicine God City was too great. After all, one was an organization that had been passed down for countless years, while the other was just a small organization that split off. Yes, my friend said that the Alchemy Alliance will send out true geniuses to participate this time. It said that they're all grade 4 alchemists, and there will be no less than 10 of them." Taking a deep breath, the perfect stage martialist looked at his companion with some surprise, unable to believe what he just heard. 10 grade 4 alchemists participating? What a big deal! I remember that the dimmest competition in history didn't even have a single grade 4 alchemist. Even the bigger ones only had 5 or 6 alchemists. But this time, the Alchemy Alliance sent out 10 grade 4 alchemists. If we add in the other grade 4 alchemists that might appear, then the number of grade 4 alchemists that will appear this time will really reach a terrifying number. The two looked at each other and saw the slight excitement in each other's eyes. Grade 4 alchemists, Grade 4 alchemists under 100 years old, there's definitely a possibility of becoming a Grade 6 alchemist grandmaster in the future. If more than 10 Grade 4 alchemists really appeared this time, perhaps this competition will really become a classic. Looking at the 100 stages below, the scene of tens of thousands of people refining pills at the same time, the 11 alchemists all revealed happy smiles. The number of participants this time is not only the most in history, but also the most prosperous one. Hearing Wangue's words, Gu Gue also nodded gently. The quantity is huge, and the quality is also shockingly high. Compared to the previous competitions, the quality is at least a level higher. The alchemy grandmasters nodded their heads lightly. They really didn't expect such a situation to occur this time. Originally, they thought that this competition would be similar to the previous ones, but who would have thought that it would evolve into the current situation? I heard that you also sent out a lot of disciples this time. Also, they're all Grade 4 alchemists. Looks like the medicine god territory will also have to do something this time. Hearing this, Taradas lightly smiled and didn't deny anything. He glanced at Yuan Ling and lightly said, "In the previous few competitions, your independent alchemist guilds were too strong. If we don't do something, I'm afraid we'll be replaced by you." While those words were a joke, they also served as a warning. However, the other 3 alchemists didn't seem to hear it. Their eyes were focused on the competition below. Seeing the slightly strange atmosphere, Huang Yi sighed slightly and said, "I heard that a few days ago, the Battle of the Kings started. I really didn't expect there to be 3 overlords in this era, and there's even an even more heaven-defying human emperor. But it's not over yet. There's going to be a 4th overlord. This is really shocking." These words seemed to have some magical power, making the alchemists who had different expressions fall completely silent. After a long time, Wangue lightly sighed. "Things are indeed very strange. I believe that the supremes of the various clans should have already sensed something. In such a glorious era, there was bound to be some kind of heaven-shaking change. I just don't know what it is." Silence. It was incomparably silent. After all, many beings had sensed that things were strange, but they couldn't tell what it was. Even the supreme beings couldn't explain it, so it was even more impossible for them. Well, what's the point of thinking about this? Even if there's a big change, it has nothing to do with us. These things will naturally be considered by the pinnacle kings of the various races. What we need to think about is the matter of the alchemy division. Hearing Huang Ye's words, the 10 alchemists all nodded slightly. Looking at the tests below, which had ended one after another, Taradas's eyes shone brightly. There are many freaks running amok in the martial path. After all, the birth of the Battle of the Kings means that freaks will appear one after another. Previously, the human race had the King of Killers, Lu Tao. Recently, there's the even more terrifying Emperor, Lu Feng, and the Supreme King, Heavenly King of Heavenly Dao Crown Prince, Wang Qingyun. So far, there have been 3 freaks at the pinnacle of the 7th level in the King Path domain. Originally, I thought that this era was destined to be the era of martial arts. But now, it seems that our alchemy division is going to shine with its own brilliance. Looking at the freaks and geniuses below, who far surpassed the previous era, the great masters all nodded slightly. Of course, when they saw these people's expressions, the 4 great masters of the Alchemy Master Alliance and Lonely Ghost smiled strangely at each other. They understood the meaning of these words better than anyone else. Alright, the competition is about to end. After the remaining tests are over, we can proceed to the semifinals. Which of you will be the judge for this semifinals? Taradas looked at the 10 alchemists beside him. They all smiled indifferently. They didn't argue, nor did they try to avoid it. When he saw this, Taradas fell silent for a moment. After a while, he said, "How about this? The leaders of the 5 independent territories will be the judges for this semi-finals. Everyone exchanged glances with each other and finally nodded their heads gently. This was the fairest way, so they naturally didn't have any objections. When he saw that the last group of tests had ended, Taradas stood up. Although he didn't use much strength, his voice undoubtedly spread throughout the entire area. I also didn't expect that so many geniuses would emerge from this test. It seems that our alchemy division will also prosper. When they heard Taradas's words, regardless of whether they passed or failed the test, they all nodded lightly. As the examinees, they naturally understood how terrifying this test was. Unlike the previous years, those who could stand out this time were all alchemists. More than 100 grade 3 alchemists walked out of the 100 venues. This was, without a doubt, shocking. Moreover, there were many alchemists among those who were eliminated. This definitely wouldn't happen in the previous years. Therefore, these people believed Taradas's words. No matter what, although some people failed, your achievements are still gratifying. This is only a test. Your future achievements have nothing to do with the present. Therefore, those who failed don't have to be discouraged. You have to know that your true strength is in the future. The future belongs to you. In an instant, the alchemists who had failed before reignited their fighting spirit. They knew that Taradas was right. Failure in this grand competition didn't mean anything. Their true strength was in the future. Only the true pinnacle was what they pursued. Taradas smiled in satisfaction when he saw that the alchemists below had reignited their fighting spirit. Alright, the rest of you can come up. The earlier you finish the preliminary round, the earlier the semi-finals can start. After saying this, Taradas took a step and returned to the spectator stands in the void. Chapter 393. The preliminary round of the second round began quickly. This time, it was not as exaggerated as the first round. The 100 venues were full. However, the total number of people was not small. There were more than 7,000 people. There are actually more than 17,000 people participating in this preliminary round. This is the highest number in all of history. The 10 alchemy masters nodded gently. In the previous round, more than 6,000 people participated in the grand competition. This time, it was 3 times more. Such a number was truly shocking. The second group took about the same amount of time as the first group. In terms of quality, there was not much difference. In the 73 arenas, 73 grade 3 alchemists walked out. In addition to the 100 from before, the number had reached a terrifying 173 alchemists. There was no doubt that this had never happened in the previous rounds. Seeing that the 173 alchemists were all suspended in the void, Taradas finally stood up. His face was calm, as if nothing could shake him. As he stood up, the presidents of the 4 independent alchemist guilds, including Wangue and Yuanling, also stood up. Seeing this scene, everyone understood what was going on. At this moment, a burst of cheers rang out, almost making the entire Medicine God Square explode. It's actually 5 alchemists acting as judges. 5 alchemists. This time, it's actually 5 alchemists acting as judges for the semifinals. Shocking, this is absolutely shocking. Previously, Taradas had also said that there would be alchemists acting as judges. However, in the hearts of these people, the so-called alchemists were just letting one alchemist lead the overall situation. The real judges were still those alchemy masters. However, looking at the current situation, it seemed that they were all wrong. This time, there were really alchemists acting as judges. Moreover, there were 5 alchemists acting together. Looking at the 5 alchemists standing side by side, the 173 alchemists who passed the assessment were abnormally excited. They were only alchemists, and they were even the lowest existence among alchemists. However, opposite them were alchemy masters who were recognized as the 5th of the 13 alchemists in the universe. If it hadn't been for the alchemy master competition, they would never have had anything to do with these shocking figures. However, this time they had the chance to get close to them. How could these grade 3 alchemists not be excited? "Greetings, your highnesses." Following the first alchemist's words, the rest of the alchemists began to shout in unison. In an instant, a total of 173 voices spread throughout the world. The 5 grandmasters all revealed strangely amiable smiles. They nodded gently and waved their hands. At this time, Taratus walked out and slowly said, "The semi-finals this time are very simple. You don't need to refine any heaven-shaking pills. What we want to test is the speed at which you refine the essence. Everyone, choose a divine object to refine. After you succeed, hand over the refined divine object's essence to us. As long as there are no accidents, you will pass. For the preliminaries, the top 20 candidates will enter the finals." Hearing the requirements of the test, everyone was slightly stunned. They did not understand what Taratus was trying to do. He remembered that in the past, the semi-finals were all about refining medicinal pills. This had never changed. However, this time, Taratus actually made such a request. However, these people did not say anything. They all nodded gently. They were just here to take the test. And Taratus was the one who made the test. His words were the rules of the test. Unlike the confusion of the examinees and the grandmasters of alchemy, Wangue Gugue and some of the grandmasters who witnessed Lu Feng's test all revealed strange expressions. They seemed to have guessed why such a rule appeared. "Well, take out the medicinal herbs you have prepared and start refining." When his voice fell, the figures of the 5 grandmasters slowly rose into the air. After reaching a peak, they no longer spoke. Seeing this scene, the 173 alchemists understood that it was time for them to take the stage. Without hesitation, medicinal herbs suddenly appeared in the field. These were the grade 3 divine objects prepared by the 173 alchemists. Psychic masters were different from martial artists. They needed to become gods to open their own personal worlds and spaces. As long as they had enough support, they could have their own independent space at the level of a psychic master. Those who could become alchemists were undoubtedly the most precious assets of the major forces. Therefore, as long as they were alchemists, they would definitely have their own independent space. In the sky, countless grade 3 divine objects were piled up. It was extremely dazzling. Although they were all grade 3 divine objects, there were many kinds of them. It should be known that every alchemist who came to participate in the grand competition had made sufficient preparations. The grade 3 divine objects they brought were the best among the grade 3 divine objects. There were a lot of them, and there were many kinds of them. They could only be seen in the grand competition. Gradually, someone began to refine the divine object. Countless mental power rose and formed 173 complex array patterns in the void. In the next moment, these array patterns were all submerged into the divine objects in front of them. Masses of essence began to appear, and the divine objects began to slowly disappear. They were smelted into a mass of substance. Everyone knew that this was the essence of the divine objects. As long as the essence of a few divine objects was fused together, it would become a grade 3 or 4 elixir pill. However, this time, the assessment was only about the speed of refining the divine object. There was only one kind of divine object. Therefore, these alchemists did not hold back at all. They used all their mental power just to refine one kind of essence as soon as possible. Time passed very quickly. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It was not until the 40th minute that a grade 3 alchemist finally finished refining the essence. Lu Feng, who was standing in the crowd, could also feel that this grade 3 alchemist was at the limit of a grade 3 alchemist. He could even refine a grade 4 elixir pill if he performed perfectly. After this grade 3 alchemist had finished refining, over the next 10 minutes, dozens of other alchemists had finished refining as well. Just like that, after more than an hour, all the assessments were finally over. 173 alchemists stood quietly in the void. Although many people had been eliminated in terms of speed, the alchemists had said that this assessment was not only about speed, but also about quality. Therefore, many people still had a glimmer of hope. Everyone's eyes were focused on the 5 silent figures in the void. They knew that the real determinants of whether they could pass and enter the finals were the 5 silent figures. Finally, following Taradas' actions, the other 4 alchemists also walked down from the void and landed in front of the 137 alchemists. According to the refining speed, you can take out the refined essence one by one. When the 137 Tier 3 pill masters heard Taradas' words, they all lined up in an orderly manner. Among them, no one chose to stand randomly. After all, the 100 million cultivators present were not idiots. Based on the strength of their souls, they could naturally remember the order clearly. Besides them, the 5 alchemists were the same. Therefore, these people were taking photos in order. He casually took the essence refined by the first alchemist. Taradas looked at it carefully and nodded his head gently. Good, pass. These 2 simple words made the grade 3 alchemist heave a long sigh of relief. Although he was the first to pass, this did not mean that he would definitely pass. Now that he heard Taradas' announcement, he was finally completely relieved. However, many people behind him did not have such a good opportunity. In order to pursue speed, the quality of the essence refined by so many people was completely unacceptable. This kind of essence simply could not be used to refine elixirs. Therefore, among the top 20 alchemists in speed, less than 10 people passed the assessment. It was not until the 81st person that all 20 alchemists were chosen. When they saw this scene, the grade 3 alchemists who had failed to pass the assessment were not too disheartened. They knew that they were indeed not as good as the people in front of them. Compared to their friends who were also grade 3 alchemists but had not even passed the first round of assessment, they were already very lucky. Moreover, these people were very clear about their own strength. In this grand alchemy competition, they were just going through the motions. The true fighting was between the inhuman geniuses of the younger generation, between the Tier 4 alchemists. In any case, they had already achieved their goal of showing their faces, so these people did not find it too hard to accept. The 20 young alchemists who had stood out once again took a step forward, moving towards a higher level in the sky. As for the remaining alchemists who had been eliminated, they once again returned to the ground and belonged to their own camp. Although they had failed this time, however, no one dared to look down on them. Alchemists who were not even 100 years old. What did this mean? Many people understood that this meant that as long as they did not die, they would definitely become alchemy grandmasters. Alchemy grandmasters were already terrifying existences who could refine high-grade elixirs. No one dared to offend such people. At this moment, everyone's gaze was focused on the sky. They knew that the real moment had arrived. Next was the finals. The finals also meant that many true monsters were about to appear. Countless people's gazes were fervent as they quietly looked at the sky. At this moment, Taradas walked out once again. The presidents of the 4 alchemist guilds stood quietly behind Taradas, as if they were his companions. However, the reality was as such. In terms of strength, Taradas was recognized as one of the 3 alchemists who were closest to the alchemy Saint Master. In terms of status, as the Grand Elder of the Alchemy Guild, when the Guild Master was not around, it could be said that he controlled everything. Therefore, everything was decided by him. No one could raise any objections. Looking at the 20 young grade 3 alchemists, Taradas sighed slightly. Apart from those who had already understood everything, everyone looked at Taradas with confusion. They did not understand why he would sigh like that. Behind him, Wangue smiled slightly. He knew everything from the beginning. Wangue understood that this assessment should be something that Taratus had come up with on the spur of the moment. Therefore, he did this because he was provoked by Lu Feng. Previously, when Lu Feng was taking the Grade 4 Alchemist assessment, it took him less than 5 minutes to complete the refinement. Moreover, he had completed it with 4 divine items. After he finally succeeded, the quality of the elixirs had already explained everything. One had to know that Lu Feng was countless times smaller than everyone present. However, Lu Feng's strength had already surpassed everyone present. Chapter 394. Alright, next up is the final test. I am very happy that all of you were able to break through 17,000 people and reach this place. Taratus scanned the crowd, and the alchemists he saw all puffed out their chests. After a satisfied smile, Taratus continued, all of you are the geniuses of the Alchemist Alliance. Not just you, but all of the younger generation participating in the competition are the future of the Alchemist Alliance. All of you should have sensed that this year's Alchemy Master competition is much more prosperous than the previous one. Therefore, the Alchemist Alliance will definitely prosper in the future. It will definitely reach its most prosperous state in history. After saying this, Taratus suddenly looked at the excited young alchemists in the arena. His voice was amplified countless times at this moment. The ones who can bring the Alchemist Alliance to such a prosperous state are all of you, the geniuses of the Alchemist Alliance. Tell me, do all of you have the confidence? Can all of you carry the banner of the Alchemist Alliance and build the foundation of the Alchemist Alliance's future hope? There were about 100,000 young alchemists present, including the alchemy apprentices. Although 100,000 people were nothing compared to the hundreds of millions of cultivators from the various races in the arena, their voices were still the same. But at this moment, the voices of these 100,000 people were the only existence in the world, the only sound. Yes, we are willing. We will create the future of the Alliance. We will dominate the future of alchemy. A trace of excitement appeared on Taratus's face. In fact, Taratus himself understood that he had already reached his limit. Although he was known as the alchemist closest to the Sage Tao, he knew that he had no hope in this life. Right now, Taratus's greatest hope was the prosperity of the Alchemist Alliance. He was actually the same as Wangue and Yuanling. The only difference was that Wangue and Yuanling cared about their own races, while Taratus cared about the Alchemist Alliance. Now that he saw the arrival of the Alchemist Alliance's unprecedented prosperity, although he was already a true supreme powerhouse in this part of the universe, he still felt his heart tremble. This was a trembling of the soul, a symphony of fate. The same thing happened behind Taratus. The Grandmaster leaders of the 4 independent territories were also excited. Beside them, 6 figures had appeared out of nowhere. These 6 figures were the 6 great alchemy Grandmasters who had been on the Void Spectator stand previously. Now, they had also appeared. We've already agreed that during the finals, all of you will judge and preside over it together. That's why we came down. Su Ling smiled, but Wangue could see the excitement in Su Ling's eyes. These people were essentially the same. If it weren't for the fact that they were separated by different races, perhaps they would have become best friends and sacrificed everything for the Alchemist Alliance. However, although there were racial camps, these people's passion for the path of alchemy all came from the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, they were willing to do their part for the path of alchemy at this moment. When the alchemists below saw that the last 6 alchemy grandmasters had really walked out, their emotions were once again stirred up. Once again, their emotions were stirred up endlessly. The hearts of many martialists trembled slightly. This situation was something they had never imagined before coming. 11 great alchemy grandmasters, more than 10,000 competitors, and more than 500 grade 3 alchemists. This was something that had never happened before in the history of the tournament. It could be said that this situation alone made everyone realize that this trip had not been in vain. In every corner of Medicine God City, when the 11 great alchemy grandmasters had appeared, many people had put aside their own matters and started watching the scene through the big screens. And now, when the crowd's emotions were stirred to the extreme, the spectators were also incomparably agitated. A feeling of extreme excitement appeared in their hearts. More and more powerhouses had started to rush towards the Medicine God Square. Everyone had a hunch that this year's youth competition would truly be an incomparably grand occasion. If they couldn't personally witness such a competition, it would be the greatest sorrow. This time, there are 20 Grade 3 alchemists who have passed the assessment. In a while, all of you will compete with those who have been exempted from the assessment for the final victory. After the atmosphere calmed down slightly, Taradas finally spoke slowly. When they heard this, everyone present revealed a strange glow. They knew that the real final moment was finally about to begin. The Alchemist Alliance, the 4 great alchemist halls, and the many freaks from the rogue cultivators were finally about to appear. Sure enough, in the next moment, Taradas suddenly announced loudly, "Next, it's time for all of you freaks to ascend." The moment his voice fell, waves of aura appeared. Although it was not frightening to the point of trembling, the gradually rising will of a powerhouse suppressed all existences at this moment. These martialists did not resist, because they knew that it was useless. This was because those freakish alchemists had already merged with the most ancient will of the entire Medicine God Square just now. At this moment, they were supported by the eternal will of the alchemists for countless years. Under this kind of will, anyone below the level of a god would definitely be completely suppressed. Those 10 figures must be the 10 freaks of the Alchemist Alliance. I didn't expect the legend to be true. A martialist in the upheaval period suddenly shouted when he saw the 10 figures rushing out of the moving spatial fortress. This martialist lived in Medicine God City all year round, so he knew many things that others would never know. And these 10 freaks were one of them. Seeing the questioning gazes around him, a trace of pride flashed in the martialist's eyes. However, he didn't deliberately delay anything. This was because the owners of the questioning gazes around him were far stronger than him. He knew that if he was not careful, there might even be a god who hid his aura. Therefore, the warrior in the upheaval period began to reveal everything he knew. Legend has it that after the conflict between the Wind God Region's Alchemist Guild and the 3 independent alchemist guilds broke out in the previous assessment, the Alchemist Alliance realized something. As the headquarters, they were actually unable to suppress this conflict, which made the Alchemist Alliance feel embarrassed. Everyone gently nodded their heads. The Alchemist Alliance was the headquarters of Medicine God City. And here, after countless years, the resources and divine items could be said to be unlimited. This was far from being comparable to the other 4 independent alchemist guilds. Moreover, there were 4 alchemy masters who were permanently stationed here. This was the sum of the other 4 alchemist guilds. However, under such an overwhelming situation, they couldn't suppress it. This finally made the Alchemist Guild realize that their prestige had been reduced. In order to re-establish the prestige of the headquarters, the Alchemist Alliance was completely ruthless. The 4 great alchemy masters and the few wandering alchemy masters took action at the same time and began to search for suitable disciples from all the major clans in the entire universe. The major clans were very welcoming of these alchemy masters and were also very happy with their actions. After all, this is equivalent to cultivating an alchemy freak for their own clans. Therefore, they quickly selected some peerless freak. And these freaks were gathered in the Alchemist Center, and the 2nd and 3rd steps of screening were carried out. In the end, the list of 10 people was finally determined. Then, the alchemy masters personally taught them, and the Alchemist Alliance provided them with unlimited resources. Finally, the 10 freaks who caused a stir in Medicine God City were created. Hearing this, many people nodded lightly. It turned out that these 10 freaks were created by the Alchemist Alliance in order to maintain their prestige. Seeing the 10 figures soar into the sky, many people smiled and nodded. They knew that this time, it was going to be very interesting. The 10 freaks of the alchemist guilds were the first to descend into the sky. They stood beside the 20 grade 3 alchemists. Although they hadn't done anything before, when they stood there quietly, they had stolen all the glory. They were freaks. There was no need for words to express themselves. Their existence was to dim everything in the world. Seeing the 10 grade 4 alchemists appear, the atmosphere became even more lively. Soon after, another 8 figures soared into the sky and landed beside the top 10 monstrous talent. Looking at this scene, everyone took a deep breath. The great grandmasters all had strange looks in their eyes. They looked at the 3 alchemist guilds with strange expressions on their faces. These people knew that these 8 people were from the 3 alchemist guilds. 18 alchemists, a total of 18 alchemists. This year's grand competition is really terrifying. It's really shocking. In the previous grand competition, there were only 4 alchemists. In the final competition, there were only 3 grade 4 alchemists. But this time, there are 18 of them. This is too scary, too scary. In Medicine God City, there were many cultivators who had always been here. They had seen the previous grand competition and even the one before that. These people were the ones who were most qualified to speak. However, just as people continued to clamor, another figure suddenly appeared in the sky. 19 alchemists. The 19th alchemist wasn't the limit, and it wasn't the main point. Because after the appearance of the 19th grade alchemist, the 20th, 21st, and 22nd grade 4 alchemists also descended. These were all alchemists from the rogue cultivator faction. They were all freaks of nature. Now, they finally appeared in front of everyone. Many of them sighed deeply. Even the 11 alchemists had strange expressions on their faces. None of them expected that 22 fourth-tier alchemists would show up this time. One had to know that in the most prosperous grand competition in history, the number of grade 4 alchemists did not exceed 25. But now there were 22 of them. This was enough to leave their names in history. However, some people knew that it wasn't over yet. 22 of them wasn't the limit, because there were still people who hadn't arrived. Chapter 395. As if to prove their words, 2 figures slowly walked over from the void. These were 2 young figures. However, these figures seemed to condense the will of the sky and earth. The moment they appeared, the entire void seemed to have condensed into an eternal state. Everyone could vaguely see the appearance of an endless will. It was as if they could hear the sound of an inextinguishable flame burning in the endless space and time. The flame of inheritance. This time, the person who spoke was no longer an ordinary person. It was a supreme existence in the alchemy Tao. He was a grandmaster. The 11 alchemy Tao masters were silent. However, their eyes were trembling with fear. This was excitement, this was horror, this was shock. Who would have thought that this era would not only be the era of those monstrous geniuses, but also the golden age of our alchemy Tao? According to the ancient legends, the golden age of the alchemy Tao masters would arrive when the flame of inheritance appeared. This should be the first time it has appeared in this era. Tiratus muttered softly. He finally looked at the 2 figures walking over from the power of the flame in the void. As expected, it's him. However, who is the other person? Many people recognized one of them. He was Lu Feng. However, there was another figure beside Lu Feng. He was also walking gently, shuttling through the eternal truth of the inheritance. Everything had been proven. He was a monstrous genius, a supreme genius in the alchemy Tao. He was a peerless genius who could be compared to Lu Feng. Everyone's eyes were instantly focused on him. Although most people did not know what this strange phenomenon represented, they knew that it was definitely not an ordinary sign. Previously, when the 22 monstrous geniuses had appeared, there had only been an indescribable feeling. However, there had not been any strange phenomenon. But now, the mere appearance of these two people had caused such a shocking scene. Clearly, the two of them were destined to be extraordinary people. Slowly, one step, and then another. The two of them finally met in the void. They didn't head to the place where the geniuses were gathered. Instead, they stood in the void and stared at each other quietly. At this moment, there was nothing else in the world. The only things that existed were these two existences, their eternal figures. The 11 alchemy grandmasters didn't say anything. They just watched everything quietly. After a long time, Su Ling let out a long sigh. This, perhaps, is fate. Some people understood what he meant, while others didn't. But the 11 grandmasters of alchemy all understood. They understood the meaning of Void Spirit's words. That's right. This is probably fate. Both of them are monstrous alchemy geniuses that only appear once in an era. However, they were born at the same time. If they can be born in separate eras, then through the efforts of these two monsters, they might really be able to create an era that is second only to the pill and artifact civilization. The birth of such a monstrous genius was enough to turn an era of civilization into a glorious golden age. But when two monsters were born at the same time, it became a kind of tragedy. Because it was just like the beginning of the War of the Kings. In an era, there could only be one true and eternal theme. There could only be one most brilliant existence that could decide everything in the end. Between heaven and earth, there was silence. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. Endless strange phenomena appeared, embellishing a kind of illusory prosperity. It made the two people, who were in the midst of this brilliance, feel as if they had left the world and entered an era of bliss, a perfect country. Finally, he smiled. It was an incomparably happy smile. There was a faint throbbing in his heart. It was an indescribable feeling. Lu Feng quietly looked at the person in front of him with a smile on his face. He was looking at a person dressed in snow-white robes. His white hair fluttered in the wind. His exquisite face was like a sculpture. No one could see any traces of disorder on his face. His existence seemed to be the pinnacle of perfection between heaven and earth. It was a kind of illusion that surpassed countless people in the world. He quietly and gracefully waved his hand. This was a peerless figure in the world. However, no one could tell what race he was from. No one could tell what kind of existence he was. This was a kind of independence, a kind of brilliance. In the void, the two people, the two supreme monstrous alchemy geniuses, looked at each other for a long time. Finally, they slowly opened their mouth. "You are Futu, right?" Lu Feng was slightly stunned. He didn't know how the person opposite him knew him. But Lu Feng still nodded his head gently. He said indifferently, "I am Futu." No one understood what Lu Feng meant. Perhaps only those who had been with Lu Feng and followed Lu Feng would understand the meaning of these words. But they wouldn't say it. The peerless existence opposite him nodded his head gently. There was a strange expression on his face. "You can be considered as a Buddha." Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. But soon, he smiled. This was because he had already figured it out. He knew that there were some things that the person opposite him already knew. "So, you have already guessed the possibility of my identity. But who are you?" Lu Feng was still incomparably indifferent. At this moment, he was looking at the peerless man opposite him with a strange expression. This was a kind of trembling in his heart. It was a kind of world-shaking indifference. It was an indescribable feeling of supremacy. However, in the face of such a peerless existence, Lu Feng actually didn't have any impulse to fight. He knew that it wasn't that he didn't want to fight, but that he couldn't. At this moment, Lu Feng didn't have any chance of winning against him. Even if he suppressed his cultivation base to the same level, Lu Feng still didn't have any chance of winning. In the face of such a sure-lose battle, Lu Feng actually lost any desire to fight. When he heard Lu Feng's question, the peerless man opposite him lowered his head gently. Between his brows there was a kind of desolation. Gradually, he raised his head and looked at the boundless horizon. A kind of desolate aura slowly appeared and actually affected everything in the audience. This strength was clearly an existence of a spiritual psyche master. He actually relied on his aura to affect everything in the audience. Shocking. In fact, it could already be described as world-shaking. At this moment, the 11 great alchemy masters all revealed a world-shaking light. They looked at the peerless man and couldn't believe everything they saw. Who is he? How can there be such an abnormal existence in this universe? Could it be that he is the Emperor Lu Feng? But isn't the Emperor a martial artist? How can there be a spiritual psyche master? But if he isn't the Emperor, how can such a monster appear? The faces of the alchemy masters were incomparably strange. This person was a monster. He was an invincible monster that had already surpassed everything. It made people tremble in fear. They simply couldn't have any impulse to fight at the same level. What he represented seemed to be invincible. It was a kind of feeling that was truly invincible among the same level. The peerless man finally turned his gaze to Lu Feng. In his eyes, it was as if everything in the world no longer existed. The only thing that existed was Lu Feng. Everything else was just an illusion. It didn't matter at all. My name, I have also forgotten it. Forgotten? Lu Feng was slightly stunned. Although he didn't say the truth, he still said a name. But this peerless existence in front of him actually said that he had already forgotten his name. Is this possible? Seeing Lu Feng's expression, the peerless man smiled lightly. And this smile actually caused the world to change. I've really forgotten my own name. Of course, if possible, I don't want to remember it. Because my feelings tell me that there are some things that I shouldn't remember. Lu Feng was silent. He only looked at the peerless man with a slightly strange expression. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, he smiled lightly. Don't think too much. A name represents nothing more than a symbol. Is it really that important? There is a supreme peak in front of you. Then, are you willing to leave your name behind, or are you willing to give up everything and move forward for that supreme peak? Hearing this, Lu Feng seemed to feel something. And the moment he looked at the man, Lu Feng seemed to see sadness. A kind of sadness that made him feel uncomfortable. For some reason, when Lu Feng heard these words, he felt that it wasn't simple. He kept feeling that the last sentence of the peerless man seemed to have some kind of profound meaning in it. It was a pity that Lu Feng didn't know anything about the peerless man. Therefore, he simply didn't know everything. Lu Feng simply stopped thinking about it. After a moment, Lu Feng nodded lightly. What are you here for? Do you really want to compete with me on the path of alchemy? The man smiled lightly and shook his head slightly. However, he nodded again. I'm here for you. But when I arrived, I realized that I came too early. Last time I was late. This time I'm early. However, it's a good thing that I'm early. If I were late, then everything would be sad. I really don't want to wait any longer. After all, this is my last chance. The man's words were incomprehensible. When Lu Feng heard these words, he felt that there was some kind of profound meaning in them. However, he couldn't say what it was exactly. Since I'm already here, then I'll fight with you in this unrelated domain. After all, you are an emperor, a king. In your domain, you must become the greatest existence. As for me, I've never liked anyone suppressing me. Lu Feng felt a little strange. He knew that this peerless man really knew everything about him. He had already guessed his identity. He knew that he was an emperor, a king. He was Emperor Lu Feng. And his words also explained one thing. That was, he didn't admit his identity. He wanted to fight, but unfortunately, he wasn't a match for him right now. Even if he was suppressed to the same level as him, he still wasn't. Therefore, he wanted to temporarily separate himself from him in this domain of alchemy, which he didn't think was important. After a moment of silence, Lu Feng finally smiled slowly and threw away all the thoughts in his heart. At this moment, only a kind of carefreeness and indifference remained. Then, how should I address you in the future? The peerless man saw that Lu Feng had returned to normal in such a short period of time. The peerless man also smiled. He knew that he had come. That's right. In the future, I will wait for you in a certain extreme realm. I will wait for you to help me break the true shackles and walk towards the supreme peak that I have given everything to pursue. Therefore, you should know what I'm called. Then you can call me Immortal King. Chapter 396. The entire place was silent. Countless people heard the man's words, and their eyes were filled with incomparable shock. Immortal King. He let others call him Immortal King. Someone actually dared to use such a supreme title? Someone actually dared to call him that in front of so many people. This was simply too arrogant. It was simply too arrogant to the point that there was no end to it. One had to know that Lu Feng's title of emperor was gradually accepted after he defeated the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, who was at the same level as him. And this was only the beginning of people's acceptance, but it was not recognized yet. However, the person in front of them wanted others to call him Immortal King. This was simply arrogant to the point of no bounds. One had to know that in the universe, immortal was the true taboo. After the immortal devil era, the bloodline of the devil had been passed down. Legend had it that the heavenly devil clan of this era had the bloodline of the devil. However, from the immortal devil era until now, immortal had always been a legend. It was a true supreme title. Although according to the legend, ordinary immortals were only existences at the level of Void Emperor, until now, no one dared to call themselves immortal. Not a single person. Even someone as strong as the Divine King was the same. This was reverence for immortals and also a kind of fear. And this was the first time they heard someone call themselves immortal. Moreover, this title was Immortal King. In the entire place, the only person who did not feel anything was Lu Feng. After hearing this title, he only nodded slightly. He was not affected by the man from before. Immortal King, you are indeed qualified to use such a title. This, I admit. Previously, Lu Feng thought that he was already invincible in his generation. He was already strong enough to completely overthrow the younger generation of the same level. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, Wang Qingyun, had 2 supreme powers and a quasi-supreme power. He was already at the peak of the 7th stage of the monarch realm. However, even such an existence, under Lu Feng's craziest and most extreme outburst, he was still able to beat him, who was at the same level as him, until he trembled. Even when the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao entered a period of upheaval, he was still unable to defeat Lu Feng. It could be said that in Lu Feng's eyes, there was no real opponent in the same realm. However, things were different now. This was because he saw this peerless man. This was the scariest man Lu Feng had ever met. This was the only one that gave him the misconception that he would definitely lose in a battle of the same level. The feeling he gave him was as if he was facing a young king of man. After all, there was nothing a titled celestial king could not do. Therefore, Lu Feng admitted it. However, even if Lu Feng admitted to it, it didn't mean that everyone else would. Curses could be heard from below. If it wasn't for the fact that this was the Medicine God's Square, the world of alchemists, someone would have already made a move and taught this peerless man a lesson. However, regardless of whether it was Lu Feng or the peerless man, Both of them were unfazed by the curses and the attitude of those people. For existences at their level, these people's opinions did not affect them at all. Between the two of them, one was an emperor. The glory of an emperor was bestowed upon himself. Only an emperor bestowed glory upon others. On the other hand, the other was a celestial king. A celestial king stood at the peak of the 9 heavens and looked down on all living beings. All living beings were like ants to him. As a celestial king, why would he care about the opinions of these people? Really so noisy? Lu Feng nodded lightly. The two of them finally moved slowly. They slowly walked towards the place where the 22 gifted geniuses had gathered. At this moment, lotuses bloomed in the void, and auspicious signs filled the sky. Under the footsteps of Lu Feng and the Celestial King, the auspicious signs spread to the entire place. This was the remnant will of the medicine god's square from countless eras praising the two greatest monsters. It was a kind of praise from time and space. When they saw this scene, no matter how unconvinced they were, no matter how many complaints they had, these people were completely silent. This scene had already proved the identity and potential of the two of them. They were existences that even time and space had to pay tribute to. Even the universe had to welcome respectfully. However, just as the two of them were about to walk halfway, a figure suddenly appeared in the void. Lu Feng was slightly taken aback when he saw this figure. However, he quickly shook his head. He knew this person. This was one of the 4 great royal families of the Sky Demon race, Yuhua Qingyuan, the young master of the Yuhua family, who had wanted to challenge Jiahua Wu. Yuhua Qingyuan was also a true extreme monstrous genius. He was in existence like the King of Massacre, a monster that belonged to the 6th-level monarch realm. Such a monster would be enough to become the most dazzling existence in any era, as long as the supreme monarch did not appear. However, in Lu Feng's eyes, this extreme Dao monster was not someone worthy of respect. This was because Yuhua Qingyuan simply did not have the will of a monarch. Although such an existence possessed supreme aptitude and had the possibility of becoming the supreme divine king, in Lu Feng's opinion, his chances of success were really too small. Lu Feng looked at the young master of the Yuhua royal family of the Sky Demon race, who was blocking their path. He was slightly puzzled. However, after shooting a cold glance at Lu Feng, Yuhua Qingyuan no longer paid any attention to him. At this moment, all his attention was focused on the supreme monarch and the immortal king. Lu Feng was also a little confused when he saw this. He knew that there were more than 100 million martial artists and psychic masters present. 99% of them wanted to teach the unparalleled man a lesson. It was only because of their own strength and the rules of the scene that they could not help but not make a move. However, who would have thought that Yuhua Qingyuan would actually make a move? He actually became the first and only person to make a move. However, when Lu Feng saw one of the 11 alchemy grandmasters with a strange expression, all his confusion was completely dispelled. The president of the Dark Region Alchemist Hall, one of the 13 great alchemy grandmasters of the universe, seemed to be called Yuhua Yan. He should also be a member of the Yuhua family. Yuhua Qingyuan looked at the immortal king with a sinister expression. After a long while, he sneered. Immortal king? What arrogance! You're even more arrogant than an emperor. Since you're called the immortal king, let me see exactly how you became an immortal king. Lu Feng was slightly speechless when he saw this. He looked at Yuhua Qingyuan and sighed deeply. Yuhua Qingyuan was a mid-perfect stage martialist. The supreme monarch was only a pinnacle spiritual psychic master. A spiritual psychic master was equivalent to a upheaval stage martialist. Before ascending to godhood, there was still a slight difference between a spiritual psychic master and a warrior of the same level. He knew that Yuhua Qingyuan could use this occasion to incur the wrath of the crowd. With Yuhua Yan's help, Yuhua Qingyuan could act a little wantonly and use his own strength to suppress the supreme monarch openly. In this way, his reputation could be further improved. However, when he heard this, the Supreme Monarch laughed. It was a kind of cold, mocking smile that was almost contemptuous. "What right do you have to see my strength?" Hua Qingyuan was shameless, but the immortal king was arrogant. Lu Feng was all smiles when he saw the immortal king's expression. At this moment, he seemed to see his own reflection in the immortal king. Hua Qingyuan's face darkened slightly when he heard this. However, he didn't lose his composure. After all, he was in front of countless powerhouses. At this moment, he was no longer representing himself. He wanted to retort, but the immortal king waved his hand gently. At this moment, even Lu Feng was slightly stunned. Although he was overbearing and arrogant, he would always let people finish their word. How could he be as unreasonable as this man? The Supreme Monarch looked at Hua Qingyuan and said slowly, "You are doing this just to use me as a stepping stone to help you reach the pinnacle. In that case, let's fight. I really don't want to waste time with you." Hua Qingyuan didn't hesitate. When the Supreme Monarch finished speaking, he attacked without regard for anything else. The terrifying power shook the void. Although this wasn't Hua Qingyuan's maximum power, he had already started to use a lot of power. This attack has already entered the realm of the 5th stage. It seems like the person who attacked is an emperor of massacre. Many of the spectating martialists could easily see Hua Qingyuan's strength. These people were all immortals. They were just concealing their strength and cultivation base. They could see everything about Hua Qingyuan. It was nothing. The tremendous power seemed to be able to easily shatter the entire chaotic void and turn this world into ashes. This power had already reached the 5th level, which was at least the 3rd level demigod domain. There was no doubt that the power of a demigod was truly terrifying in the entire universe. However, in the face of this unfathomable power, the Supreme Monarch, who was only a pinnacle spiritual telekinesis master, made a shocking move. He had only gently stretched out his arms, and was actually going to use both of his hands to forcefully resist the boundless power. In a trance, the power that was enough to destroy everything was finally about to arrive. When he saw this scene, Lu Feng didn't have any strange emotions. He was only at the peak evolution stage now. However, when facing a peak perfect stage martialist, he could even resist and suppress him under the craziest circumstances. Once he reached the peak evolution stage, he would be able to resist a 4th level demigod. Lu Feng felt that the immortal king was an existence that he couldn't fight against at the same level. How could such a terrifying existence not be able to resist the power of a 3rd level demigod? In the next moment, the immortal king moved. He finally explained to everyone what the immortal king was and why he was called the immortal king. Mysterious origin power, ancient emperor power, great underworld power. Following these 3 sentences, the immortal king's aura rose endlessly. In an instant, he proved why he was a monster. The peak 7th level monarch domain was fully displayed. In just an instant, the immortal king entered the 3rd level demigod domain. It was also at this moment that he finally moved. However, it wasn't his body that moved. It was only his arm. With a gentle wave, 3 ancient heavens appeared in the void. In the next moment, these 3 heavens displayed 3 different peerless powers. In the next moment, the 3 powers tilted and formed an invincible killing force. In the face of this terrifying killing force, Hua Qingyuan's expression changed greatly. In the next moment, a collision occurred. In the blink of an eye, Hua Qingyuan's body was sent flying far away. Chapter 397. In an instant, the world fell into silence. Everyone looked at the scene quietly, almost dumbfounded. They looked at the unparalleled man in the sky, whose arm was still gently raised. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. At this moment, even the 11 alchemy grandmasters were shocked beyond words. It's actually another existence like this. How is this possible? There's actually such a monster. What is this? 3 types of supreme powers? He actually used 3 types of supreme powers. It's too terrifying. It's really too terrifying. He's really an immortal king. Other than Emperor Lu Feng, he's the most terrifying monster in the world today. He's even more terrifying than the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao. Although the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, Wang Qingyun, had lost to Lu Feng, his strength was widely acknowledged. Even this embryonic form of a peak king in the early stages of a king's battle only had 2 supreme powers and 1 quasi-supreme power. The 3 monstrous King Tao geniuses that had appeared so far were Lu Tao, Lu Feng, and the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao. Among them, Lu Feng was widely acknowledged to be heaven-defying. He had comprehended 4 supreme powers and shocked the world. Other than him, Lu Tao only had 2 supreme powers. Of course, Lu Tao's cultivation speed was indeed shocking. Now, it was far beyond the scope of the younger generation. Even so, it couldn't overshadow the glory of the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao. But now, another monstrous genius had appeared, a supreme king. Moreover, this was a monster on the path of a psychic master. He even controlled 3 supreme powers. This was world-shocking. Wiping away the trace of blood at the corner of his mouth, Yuhua Qingyuan had an extremely complicated look in his eyes. He knew that he had really kicked an iron plate this time. Originally, he just wanted to find a pushover to bully and raise his prestige. But who would have thought that they would actually directly find a supreme king? It was actually the 4th king in the world. No wonder you're called the Immortal King. So, you're really a king. He slowly stood up with a strange light in his eyes. However, even if you are the king, the Immortal King is not something you can obtain. His aura started to soar. Although Yuhua Qingyuan's actions were extremely despicable, he was still a monstrous genius. He was an extreme monstrous genius who could break through to the divine king realm. Once he made a strong recovery, his strength would be completely revealed. In an entire era, there were only a handful of people in the same realm who could compare to him. This was the monstrous genius of the monarch Tao. In the era when monstrous geniuses did not appear, he was the pinnacle existence in the universe. He belonged to the category of the King of Slaughter. Immortal King. I admit that you, who possess 3 supreme powers, can easily suppress me at the same level as you, leaving me with no chance of resisting. You might be the first king after the emperor. Unfortunately, the current me is 2 whole levels higher than you. My limit is to become a demigod. Eruption. Complete eruption. To be able to become a monstrous genius with a rank 6 King Tao domain, then he must have comprehended a type of supreme existence. This was never an accident. Therefore, Yuhua Qingyuan was also a monstrous genius who had comprehended a type of supreme power, the King of Slaughter. Dark demonic power. His aura was finally completely shattered. Finally, he broke through all the shackles and entered the most terrifying level, the rank 4 demigod realm. The peerless man was still standing there quietly. Lu Feng could sense his indifference. Compared to the 3 demigod domain experts, Yuhua Qingyun, he didn't seem to be affected at all. Now, facing the most extreme Yuhua Qingyuan who had entered the rank 4 demigod realm, he still did not feel the slightest change. He did not care at all. Yuhua Qingyuan had finally condensed his strongest power and entered the most terrifying realm below the divine spirit realm. However, the peerless man suddenly laughed. It was an extremely mocking smile with a strong sense of disdain, as if he was looking down on someone. This is your supreme power? Dark demonic power is also a type of supreme power. Although it is really ordinary, it has still stepped into that realm. Unfortunately, you have not truly comprehended the supreme power. You are just a pitiful worm who is being controlled by this supreme power. Lu Feng was slightly stunned. Many existences were slightly stunned. Everyone was slightly stunned. Then, they looked at the crazy Yuhua Qin Yuan for a long time, but still could not see anything. It was normal that these people could not see it. After all, they did not have the supreme power. However, Lu Feng gradually felt it. He nodded his head lightly. He doesn't truly control the supreme power. This dark demonic power seems to have been forcefully injected into his body by some peerless powerhouse. Rather than saying that he possesses it, it would be better to say that he has only confined the dark demonic power and can only use it temporarily. The Immortal King heard Lu Feng's explanation and nodded with a smile. He knew that Lu Feng could see it. Otherwise, he would not have become the #1 peerless opponent in this era. This is actually a monstrous genius who has been forcefully promoted to the 6th stage of the King Path domain. He is actually just an emperor of slaughter. In the distance, the Immortal King and Lu Feng's words seemed to have touched the taboo place in Yuhua Qin Yuan's heart. Anger, boundless anger. At this moment, Yuhua Qin Yuan had already lost the last of her rationality. The terrifying power erupted completely and was about to annihilate everything in an instant. This was the most terrifying peak power of a demigod. This was the terrifying killing power of the most monstrous and supreme power. Yuhua Qin Yuan's incarnation became the only one. She even directly used the peerless killing technique that belonged to the Yuhua royal family. The Yuhua royal family was only one of the 4 royal families of the Heavenly Devil race. The Heavenly Devil race was the true Overlord race. In this era of technological civilization, the second Overlord of the era, the Great Demonic Emperor, was the ancestor of the Heavenly Devil race. Although the 4 royal families of the Heavenly Devil race were far from being comparable to the Imperial family that had walked out of the Great Demonic Emperor, they were still considered a Heavenly Devil race and a terrifying force that had been famous for a long time in the entire universe. The Yuhua royal family had given birth to more than one supreme divine king. Their Yuhua royal family was more terrifying than many of the human race's superfamilies. To be honest, among the human race, only the human King Lu family and the Emperor Yuyo could suppress the Yuhua royal family. The others were far too inferior. As such a terrifying and shocking royal family, the Yuhua lineage also had a supreme cultivation technique. It was even the most terrifying supreme cultivation technique. At this moment, when he used it, the power of power was simply indescribable. Suddenly, heaven and earth became chaotic and time became empty. Cracks began to appear in space-time, as if an era was about to shatter. After Yuhua Qin Yuan used the dark demonic energy, he had already entered the realm of a peak level 4 demigod. Such a terrifying and invincible expert, who had also used a supreme cultivation technique. His power of power could definitely be called an invincible existence below the gods. Empty era. With a shocking roar, when his power of power was accumulated to the limit, Yuhua Qin Yuan entered the ultimate peak and erupted with all of his previous ultimate combat power. However, when faced with such a Yuhua Qin Yuan, who had used a supreme cultivation technique and was the most invincible below the gods, the unparalleled man smiled. This is a little more interesting. The moment his voice fell, the 3 supreme powers appeared again. In the unseen world, 3 ancient and majestic heavens appeared, covering millions and millions of people, and all living beings looked up to them. However, everything was not over yet. Whether it was Lu Feng or the Immortal King, they all understood that the 3 supreme powers were simply unable to stop the most powerful and terrifying killing power, unable to stop Yuhua Qin Yuan, who had used a supreme cultivation technique. Therefore, the Immortal King once again softly uttered 4 words: the power of destruction. The 4th type, the supreme power, silence, shock, millions of eyes filled with disbelief, and endless pupils filled with disbelief. Everyone looked at the shocking figure in the sky, and they had temporarily forgotten to think. Lu Feng watched everything quietly, his eyes unperturbed from beginning to end. Lu Feng did not find the appearance of the fourth supreme power strange at all. He himself possessed 4 supreme powers, and any one of them belonged to the terror of the extreme Tao. They belonged to the peak of the supreme powers. Even so, when Lu Feng faced this supreme man again, he still felt his heart palpitate. He still felt that even if he faced the immortal king of the same realm, he would not be a match for him. If there were only 3 supreme powers, how could he, Lu Feng, be defeated? For that's not your limit, right? Looking at the 4 supreme heavens towering in the sky, suppressing time and space, and releasing the ultimate supreme power, Lu Feng sighed softly. These 4 supreme powers were indeed supreme powers, but there was still a gap between them and his own 4 supreme powers. Therefore, Lu Feng knew that the immortal king definitely did not only possess 4 supreme powers. In the void, after the appearance of the 4th supreme power of destruction, Yuhua Qing Yuan had gone completely crazy. Endless dark blood flowed in his eyes, and endless ruthlessness and recklessness. At this moment, he seemed to have become the incarnation of a peerless god of slaughter. The 11 alchemy grandmasters wanted to make a move, but after looking at each other, they chose to remain silent. These people all understood that the current battle was no longer a simple collision. This was a battle between kings, a true battle between kings. If it wasn't for this, many existences would have already made a move. After all, Yuhua Yen alone did not have the qualifications to break the rules here for countless years. Die for me. Yuhua Qing Yuan had gone completely crazy. The 4 great supreme powers. His opponent was actually one of the 4 supreme powers. If he faced the immortal king of the 4 supreme powers in the same realm, he would be smashed into pieces and turned into nothingness. However, this was not the case now. Because he was at the perfect intermediate stage. He was at the 6th stage, and his opponent was only at the 7th stage. He still had an advantage, a huge advantage. Finally, the final confrontation had arrived. At this moment, the immortal king's gaze fell slightly. He revealed a rare trace of solemnity. That time I came too late. Everything was already over, and this time I originally thought that I came too early. However, it seems like it wasn't too early. Finally, the immortal king gently glanced at Yuhua Qing Yuan and raised his arm again. He raised it gently, waved it gently, and finally landed it gently. Chapter 398. The fifth supreme power. How is this possible? This is absolutely impossible. How is it possible for a monster with 5 supreme powers to appear in the era of the War of the Kings? This is absolutely impossible. Immortal King, Immortal King. Could he really be the reincarnation of the Supreme Immortal King from the primordial Immortal Devil era? Exclamations and astonishment filled the air. However, in the face of this, the unparalleled man merely smiled indifferently. His opponent, Yuhua Qing Yuan, stared blankly at the scene before him. His eyes had already lost their luster. He did not die. Because Yuhua Yen still made a move at the last moment. He could not allow his family's peerless genius to fall here. Therefore, he managed to block the final attack. Everyone stared at the peerless man in shock. However, the previous scene was still replaying in their minds. The peerless man looked at Lu Feng and smiled. These people are too weak. Lu Feng nodded slightly and smiled. Then, he laughed maniacally. At the moment, Lu Feng seemed to have gone mad. He was actually laughing so unbridled and maniacally in the void. Yeah, too weak, really too weak. Lu Feng understood now. He finally understood the real reason. Just as these people had said, how could Lu Feng have touched the forbidden area at the beginning of the War of the Kings? He should not have been able to do this. Lu Feng was also a little puzzled. He did not understand why his strength was so overwhelming. Why was it completely different from what was recorded in the records? However, he knew now. It was not that he was too strong. It was that these people were too weak. They were fighting for the only Emperor's Tao. Their final destination was the domain that belonged to the Overlord of this era. However, Lu Feng was different. Completely different. Lu Feng's goal was not to become an Overlord. All along, he only had one person in his eyes. One person, the greatest person since ancient times. Therefore, Lu Feng's goal was never on the same level as theirs. To Lu Feng, everything was too weak. Looking at Lu Feng, who had lost his composure, the peerless man also smiled. It wasn't a smile of mockery or disdain. Instead, it was a happy smile. You are a king, and so am I. I can feel that they have woken up, and they have chosen to wake up at this moment. Although they have gone too far ahead of time, too far, too far. But in my eyes, they are nothing. You are an existence recognized by fate and the universe. In this era, if we don't exist, then you are destined to be the existence that reaches the end. It's a pity that we appeared. Now that we've appeared, it's hard to say whether you'll be able to make it to the end. That's because we're here for the final step as well. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the end of my Emperor's path. At that time, let's let go of everything and fight for the true supremacy of the world. Lu Feng nodded his head gently and heavily. He was an emperor. Other than him, no one would understand the true meaning of being an emperor. An emperor wasn't a ruler who ruled over a dynasty in the secular world. An emperor ruled over everything. It didn't matter if you were a heavenly king or an immortal king. As long as you exist, as long as you have a trace, then you have to accept the rule of an emperor. No one would understand Lu Feng's persistence. They wouldn't understand Lu Feng's madness. Lu Feng had never been afraid of any challenge because of this crazy thought. In the massacre abyss, the real abyss, he had experienced life and death. He had experienced life and death millions of times. In the ancient Fang tribe's altar, he had experienced 9 illusions and countless transformations of time and space. What was there to be afraid of? What was there to be afraid of? Nothing. Nothing. He, Lu Feng, would be frightened and would tremble. However, he would never be afraid of anything. In the future, I hope that I'll be able to see you and the two of you at the end of the journey. At this moment, although Lu Feng's battle prowess was not at its peak, his nobility was completely unleashed. This was a supreme emperor's aura, the most powerful majesty that could suppress everything. After the peerless man felt Lu Feng's unparalleled nobility, he actually became absent-minded for a moment, but this expression quickly disappeared. He nodded his head slightly. Yes, absolutely, we will. The two of them were quietly walking in the sky. Everyone's attention was focused on the two of them. At this moment, they were the center of attention. Previously, no one had paid much attention to the two of them. Although they had caused a shocking phenomenon in the foreign battlefield, where strength was highly valued, as long as they had not reached the mastery stage, they would only cause a stir at most. However, things were different now. This was because the peerless man, a titled celestial king, had proven that he would definitely be able to reach the peak of the celestial realm. His talent, his glory, nothing could compare to him. Although he was only a peak spiritual psyche master, he was almost invincible among those below the godly realm. Although he might not be able to become a peak existence in the foreign battlefield, he had already proven how terrifying he would be in the future. This was something that could not be changed. Even in the foreign battlefield, strength reigned supreme. This was a terrifying existence that could not be ignored. A monstrous genius at the peak of the 7th level of the sovereign Tao domain, and an existence that had comprehended 5 types of supreme powers. This could be said to be the first person in history. Many existences didn't know if the young human monarchs had such achievements, but they knew that the other three overlords definitely didn't reach such heights. It could be said that when the celestial king had comprehended 5 supreme powers, he had surpassed Lu Feng in the eyes of many people. He was the strongest person in the Battle of the Kings. As for Lu Feng, although he didn't make a move and was only at the level of a great psyche master, none of the many existences dared to look down on him. It was for no other reason than the fact that the immortal king had said that Lu Feng was his true goal this time. Lu Feng was his true, peerless enemy. Although they still did not know Lu Feng's identity, they knew Lu Feng was also a supreme king who had surpassed the king of massacre. How could they not take such an existence seriously? Finally, the two of them arrived among the monstrous geniuses. Around them were the 20 grade 3 alchemists. Although the two of them were not the strongest among the 42 alchemists, they were the most dazzling. They were existences who could overshadow the others. Looking at the 44 existences in front of him, Taratus let out a long sigh. In his eyes there was an incomparably brilliant light. 24 monstrous geniuses. There were a total of 24 monstrous geniuses. Although there was still a certain gap between them and the 25 monstrous geniuses at the peak of history, he understood, the 10 alchemy masters understood, and everyone understood that this golden age was the most powerful one since ancient times. Just Lu Feng and the Celestial King were enough to overshadow everything. They were comparable to the 10 or even the 25 monstrous geniuses combined. This is a real great era, an incomparably brilliant and prosperous golden era. Since ancient times, there has never been a more terrifying and prosperous era than this one. And this era is also the same. The Emperor Lu Feng has already made this Battle of the Kings surpass the glory of the 3 overlords, and now this Celestial King has appeared. This era is brilliant, incomparably brilliant. Since ancient times, this is the most brilliant era. Su Ling sighed softly. At this moment, he even had a feeling that he was born at the wrong time. How he wished to be born 2,000 years later. Although he had only appeared now, in such an era, he was still only a supporting role. But to be able to compete with so many monstrous geniuses, it was enough to be proud and glorious. It looks like this era might not just have an epic overlord. It's very likely that an existence comparable to a sovereign personage will be born. Gu Gui's expression was solemn, but it also flickered with excitement. Although he couldn't participate, it was enough to be a witness. It's about to begin. I think that for the two of them, the path of alchemy masters is not the end of their struggle. But they definitely don't want to fail. After all, for existences like them, failure is intolerable. Gu Gui nodded his head gently. But a moment later, a confused look appeared on his face. He looked at Su Ling beside him and slowly asked, "I say, do you know something? That Futu is from the human race, and so are you. Do you know him?" Su Ling smiled slightly, neither admitting nor denying it. "There are some things that you have to know eventually. But it definitely won't be now. After all, there are many things that you don't know." Hearing this, Gu Gui trembled slightly. This was the second time he had heard this. The first time was from Wan Gui, and the second time was from Su Ling. He pondered for a moment, but after a moment, Gu Gui seemed to have thought of something, and his expression was filled with a strange expression. At this moment, Gu Gui had gradually connected everything. He was a grandmaster who had lived for countless years, and his knowledge was extremely broad. Just some hints were enough for him to analyze a lot of things. He looked at Su Ling, then looked at Wan Gui, and finally, gently sized up the immortal king and Lu Feng. A trace of realization gradually appeared on his face. So, it's like this. If he really is the him in the rumors, then everything makes sense. Su Ling heard Gu Gui's words, but didn't say anything. He just smiled slightly. Chapter 399. All 44 of you are the pinnacle of the younger generation in the path of alchemy. It can be said that in the future, the pinnacle of alchemy will be born from you. Even the Grandmasters and Sacred Masters will be born from you. This era will definitely be the most glorious era in history. Therefore, in this era, bring out all of your potential. Don't let the most glorious era in history be covered in shame. Hearing Taradas' words, everyone nodded their heads fiercely. The only ones who didn't react differently were Lu Feng and the Immortal King. All right, the test will now. Taradas took a deep breath and said slowly. However, just as he was about to finish, a voice suddenly rang out in the void. Wait a minute. Hearing this voice, everyone turned their gazes over. In an instant, everyone saw the person who spoke. Many existences were shocked, while Taradas and the others frowned slightly. They looked at Yu Huayan, the president of the Dark Alchemist Guild, with a look of displeasure. Yu Huayan naturally felt the displeasure of the grandmasters around him. However, he didn't feel much fear. These people were the same as him in terms of status. They were all grandmasters, and there was no distinction between them. Moreover, behind Yu Huayan was the pinnacle family of the universe, the Yu Huayan royal family. Behind the Yu Huayan royal family stood the most terrifying pinnacle overlord race in the world, the most ancient pinnacle overlord race that had once produced an overlord of an era, the Sky Devil race. Therefore, he didn't care what these people thought. Taradas frowned slightly and asked slowly, Grandmaster Yu Huayan, do you have any other questions? Addressing Yu Huayan as Grandmaster showed Taradas' displeasure as the #1 elder of the Alchemist Guild. Yu Huayan naturally heard the displeasure in Taradas' voice. However, he didn't feel any fear. He smiled slightly and said slowly, Grandmaster Taradas, I still have a question. Taradas nodded slightly. Go ahead. Yu Huayan didn't care about Taradas' attitude. He slowly scanned the crowd with a confident smile. He looked at Wan Gui mockingly, then at Su Ling. Finally, he raised his voice to a level that everyone could hear. Grandmaster Taradas, I remember that there are rules for those who didn't go through the preliminaries and semifinals to enter their roles. These rules don't seem to say that all geniuses can enter. Instead, only grade 4 alchemists can. I admit that Futu of the human race is a genius. He is even one of the most terrifying geniuses in the history of alchemy. It's just that he seems to have just passed the certification. He is indeed a monster, but he doesn't conform to the rules. If we let him enter the finals like this, I'm afraid no one will be convinced. In an instant, after everyone heard Yu Huayan's words, they all focused their gazes on Lu Feng. Lu Feng, on the other hand, remained expressionless as he stood in the same spot. Yu Huayan's cold and mocking smile became even more obvious. He continued, He is a genius, but without rules there is no world. If we break the rules just because he is a genius and let him enter the finals, wouldn't that be too much? Hearing that, Taradas did not get angry. He only looked at Yu Huayan with an incomparably strange expression. You mean that if Futu isn't a grade 4 alchemist and is just a genius, he doesn't have the right to enter the finals? Yu Huayan didn't say anything. He just nodded slightly. After witnessing this scene, Taradas smiled faintly and did not look at him. Instead, he turned to the 44 monstrous geniuses and said, In that case, let the finals begin. Grandmaster Taradas, please pay attention to your status. The Alchemist Alliance doesn't belong to you alone. It belongs to all alchemists. Please don't change the rules just because you like it. Don't make a mistake. Yu Huayan was a little angry when he saw that Taradas didn't seem to care about him. His status was very honorable. He was the president of an alchemist association. Although this identity was slightly weaker than Taradas's, his other identity, which was the most important identity, was on par with Taradas's. They were all alchemists. Now, Taradas' attitude could be said to be disregarding him. This caused Yu Huayan to feel extremely humiliated. Finally, when he heard Yu Huayan's last sentence, Taradas turned around again. However, this time, his expression was cold. Grandmaster Yu Huayan, please pay attention to your words. Don't make a mistake. The corner of his mouth curled up slightly. He didn't hide his mocking expression. Then please tell me, how did I make a mistake? What did I do to break the rules? Yu Huayan frowned slightly. He looked at Taradas and then looked at Wangui. He realized that the person who should have been angry had a strange expression on his face. That kind of strangeness, he could clearly feel. It was a strange expression that was mixed with mockery and ridicule. At this moment, Yu Huayan seemed to have thought of something. His expression became slightly ugly. He knew that he seemed to have misunderstood something. Seeing that Yu Huayan did not say anything, Taradas turned around and looked at all the examinees. He looked at the other 9 Grandmaster Alchemists and all the spectators below. Your so-called mistake, your so-called habit of breaking the rules, it's all because of Futu. Then Futu, can you tell everyone, what is your grade? Everyone's gazes were once again focused on the radiant figure. At this moment, countless people revealed different expressions. Finally, looking at the expressions of these people, Lu Feng smiled. It was an incomparably mocking smile. In the end, he looked at Yu Huayan and slowly said, Your Highness Yu Huayan, who said that I'm not a grade 4 alchemist? The moment these words were spoken, the entire place became silent. Everyone was looking at Lu Feng with disbelief written all over their faces. This was the same shocking scene that happened after the immortal king lit up the world. At the beginning, after hearing Yu Huayan's words, these people indeed thought the same as Yu Huayan. They thought that Lu Feng was really just a monster. At most, he was heaven-defying to a certain extent and became a true alchemist at such a young age. In fact, they didn't care about Yu Huayan's words at all. To be able to become an alchemist at such a young age and even cause such a shocking scene, he already had the qualifications. In that case, he already had the qualifications to enter the stage. After all, the rules were set by people. However, now, after Lu Feng said these words, everyone was really stunned. A grade 4 alchemist at such a young age? Is this possible? Some people had already spoken out their thoughts. They didn't know if this was possible or not, although their intuition told them that it was impossible. However, the scene in front of them proved that this was real. A grade 4 alchemist at the Great Spirit Master level? This isn't a joke, right? Doesn't this mean that after becoming a God-tier master, he has the qualifications to become an alchemist grandmaster? Shock, horror, speechlessness. To be able to become an alchemist grandmaster at the God-tier master level was already a truly terrifying alchemist. However, this was the first time they heard and saw someone becoming an alchemist grandmaster at the God-tier master level. Yu Huayan looked at Lu Feng in endless silence. Previously, after seeing the expressions of Taradas and Wan Gui Su Ling, he had already thought of this possibility. However, to believe that there would be a grade 4 alchemist under the age of 20, this was unacceptable no matter what. However, Lu Feng had already spoken. He had already admitted it. Yu Huayan wasn't an idiot. He knew that since Lu Feng dared to admit it in front of everyone, he definitely had enough confidence. After all, the final round was about to begin. If he didn't have that kind of strength, it wouldn't just be Futu who would lose face, but also the entire Wind God Territory's Alchemist Guild and the entire human race. At this moment, his heart was incomparably certain. After hesitating for a moment, Yu Huayan didn't say anything else. He knew that if this continued, he would only be more embarrassed. He took a deep breath and looked hard at Lu Feng, as if he wanted to engrave Lu Feng's entire appearance in his heart. Yu Huayan finally didn't say anything else. He turned around and walked towards the 9 alchemist grandmasters. Wan Gui smiled coldly when he saw this scene. A bunch of mediocre people. What you can't do doesn't mean that everyone can't do it. Our human race has never lacked geniuses or monsters. Whether it's the path of martial arts or the path of alchemy, regardless of whether it was Yu Huayan or Yuan Ling, they both revealed a slightly distorted expression when they heard those words. The Nether race and the Sky Devil race, these two great races, couldn't be said to be on good terms. However, in terms of their attitude towards the human race, they were all the same. Back in the previous session, among the alchemist guilds that were most hostile towards the human race, Yuan Ling and Yu Huayan were the most hostile. At this moment, when Wan Gui said this, they felt an incomparable sense of shame. However, the two of them didn't say anything else. After all, in front of a monster like Lu Feng, everything was a joke. After all, Lu Feng's performance was enough to prove everything. It was enough to make all the reasons they thought they could use to attack the human race become a joke. When he saw that no one was questioning him anymore, Taratus finally turned around and looked at the many monsters and geniuses once again. At this moment, his voice rang out slowly. I am an elder of the Alchemist Guild. As an elder and the president of the Alchemist Guild of Medicine Divine City, I have never forgotten my responsibilities. Of course, if any of you think that I am biased in any way, you can totally point it out. I, Taratus, am willing to accept your inspection. Chapter 400. Taratus's voice resounded throughout the area. Everyone had just woken up from the shock of Lu Feng being a grade 4 alchemist. When they heard Taratus's voice, they were completely silent. These people could feel how serious Taratus was when he said this. He wasn't being perfunctory. He really had a clear conscience. After a long time, no one answered. Taratus finally nodded his head gently. Then, let the finals officially begin. Taratus's eyes flashed as he looked at the 44 monstrous alchemists and geniuses. As the grandest youth competition in history, this will be the first time. The process will not be as casual as before. You only need to refine one pill and it will be considered over. The content of the test this time was set by the 4 great elders of the Alchemist Alliance and the presidents of the 4 great alchemist guilds. Therefore, there was no deliberate favoritism. I hope you can understand this. Hearing this, everyone was silent. They knew that it was impossible for them to be biased. After all, the 8 great alchemists setting the rules together was enough to explain everything. Seeing that no one raised any questions, Taratus continued, the test is divided into 4 parts. Of course, the first 2 parts test the potential of an alchemist. After all, if an alchemist wants to reach the pinnacle of alchemy in the future, they still need potential. The last 2 parts test the alchemist's ability to refine pills. This is a comprehensive comparison. I'm sure many of you are aware of this. Among the 22 monstrous alchemists, more than 10 of them nodded lightly. Before they came, they had already been informed. Lu Feng was the same. Alright, let me first talk about the 4 parts of the test. After a slight pause, Taratus continued. The first part is the test of mental strength affinity. As everyone knows, alchemists are special existences among the psychics. The reason why alchemists can refine pills is because of their mental strength. It can be said that every alchemist's mental strength is a mutated mental strength. The higher the affinity between an alchemist's mutated spiritual power and the divine item, the higher the chances of refining a high-quality pill. Everyone gently nodded their heads. Indeed, no matter how frightening one's comprehension ability and mental energy were, one's cultivation was still extremely high. However, if he did not have any affinity, then he would not be able to refine pills. There were 3 celestial emperors in the history of the human race. All of them were truly terrifying existences. All of them were peak existences who could defeat the divine king. But these 3 mighty heavenly emperors, not a single one was an alchemist. This was enough to explain everything. The second item is much simpler. It could be considered quite important. That was the test of mental strength. Of course, considering the different levels of psychic masters, different levels of psychic masters require different levels of psychic power. The third test is the beginning of the real test. What was being tested was the quality of the medicinal pills. This time, for the sake of fairness, a level 4 alchemist needs to concoct level 4 pills, while a level 3 alchemist needs to concoct level 4 pills. Fair? To these people, this was definitely not fair. Tier 4 medicinal pills and Tier 3 medicinal pills were simply not on the same level. However, no one questioned this statement. After all, those who could stand here were all level 4 alchemists under 100 years old. With their pride, how could they retreat in the slightest? Hence, the 44 alchemists nodded their heads lightly. Among them, even the peerless male immortal king and Lu Feng were the same. The last task is the most primitive and also the most fundamental. That is the concoction of the medicinal pills. After you have concocted the medicinal pills, the 11 of us will evaluate them one by one as judges. Everyone has to participate in all 4 tasks, and the most outstanding person will be the champion of this year's Grand Alchemy Master Competition. Do you all understand? Many of the existences nodded their heads lightly. They did not say anything because at this time, everyone had already entered a state of mind. In fact, everyone understood that the 4 tasks could avoid many problems. It seemed fair, but in fact it was the greatest unfairness. It was only the first 2 rounds, but the 23rd grade alchemists who had passed the preliminary round and entered the final round were already at a huge disadvantage. They were only geniuses, but how could the aptitude of geniuses be compared to that of monsters? If it could be compared, then they would be monsters. However, other than that, they were not completely without advantages. At least in the third task, the quality of the medicinal pills was their advantage. No matter what, it was easier for them to concoct a level 3 medicinal pill than for a level 4 alchemist. This was their advantage, and also their only advantage. However, compared to the disadvantages, this advantage was nothing. However, the 20 geniuses did not say anything, because they were not qualified. This world was just so unfair. They were powerless to resist. All they could do was accept it. Therefore, even if they had any objections, they would not say it out loud. However, when they thought that they were not completely without a chance, they were slightly excited. Moreover, when the 20 geniuses looked at the 22 monsters beside them, a trace of balance appeared in their eyes. They knew that compared to the 22 monsters, they were much luckier. After all, they were only geniuses, and failure was within their expectations. There was nothing sad or regretful about it. However, it was different for the monsters. It's a pity that they lived in the same era as those 2 monsters. Perhaps this is the sorrow of all monstrous alchemists. At this moment, everyone had the same thought in their minds. They knew that this was a kind of sorrow for any monsters and geniuses. Just like many cultivators in the era of the human king, in that era where the human king completely suppressed them, even if they had the aptitude to be the overlord of an era, their brilliance was covered up, and they did not even have a reputation. Looking at the expressions of these people, Taratus could naturally understand a lot, but he could not say anything about this matter. After glancing at these people, Taratus cut open the void and opened up his own personal space. Next, the first task will be the test of affinity. When he finished speaking, an incomparably huge crystal was dragged out from his personal space by Taratus. When they saw the crystal, everyone sucked in a deep breath of cold air. Their eyes bulged slightly, as if they could not believe what they saw. That's a mental origin crystal. But how can there be such a huge mental origin crystal? Am I seeing things? In front of Taratus, the crystal that was dragged out was placed quietly, reflecting various kinds of light, and was unusually gorgeous and beautiful. An ordinary mental origin crystal is at most the size of a fist, and it's enough to shock the world. But this one. The mental origin crystal was a true 8th grade divine item, and it was worth hundreds of millions. Lu Feng was not very clear about its specific function, but he was clear about one function, which was used by alchemists to test the degree of mutation of mental strength. Naturally, the degree of mutation was the affinity between the alchemist and the divine item. Other than testing, the mental origin crystal had other functions, but Lu Feng did not do much research on this before, so he naturally did not know about it. However, he was very clear about the value of the mental origin crystal. Just a fist-sized mental origin crystal would be worth no less than 100 trillion divine item points. However, the one placed in front of Tiratus was a little. Such a huge mental origin crystal, I'm afraid there are only 1 or 2 pieces in an era. This alchemist guild is really not simple. The peerless male immortal king could not help but sigh when he saw the terrifyingly huge mental origin crystal. After all, this thing was really, really huge. Lu Feng nodded his head gently, a slight sigh on his face. A house-sized mental origin crystal, this is the first time I've heard of it and the first time I've seen it. I'm afraid the value of this mental origin crystal is comparable to that of a sovereign's divine weapon. The divine king. Only the divine weapon of the divine king could be crowned as a divine weapon of the sovereign. The value of a divine weapon of the sovereign was already indescribable. It was the ultimate treasure of the universe, and its value could not be measured. The house-sized mental origin crystal in front of them probably had the same value. Of course, this value was priceless. This is a mental origin crystal, I'm sure everyone is aware of it. After all, when you embarked on the path of alchemy, you more or less came into contact with it. Other than Lu Feng and the Immortal King, everyone nodded slightly. When they were very young, they were discovered to have mutated mental energy through contact with the mental origin crystal, and thus were able to embark on the path of alchemy. Therefore, they were all very familiar with it. Of course, although Lu Feng did not know much about the mental origin crystal, he at least knew its function. The way to use it was very simple, just inject your mental energy into it. According to the degree of mental energy affinity, the mental origin crystal would show different colors. The lighter the color, the easier it was to fuse mental energy, and the more suitable it was to become an alchemist. Alright, come one by one and inject your mental energy into it, he shouted to Lu Feng and the other 44 people. Tiratus stood there quietly. At this time, many people looked at each other and walked directly towards the mental origin crystal. Soon, 42 people had already surrounded the mental origin crystal. Seeing this, Lu Feng said to the male immortal king, "Aren't you going?" Hearing this, the immortal king smiled slightly. "If I go, will they still let others take a look?" Lu Feng smiled slightly but did not say anything. He was confident that if he went, it would definitely cause a stir. His mental energy was the strange power in Shen Yuan's sea of consciousness. Lu Feng was not sure about other things, but he was very confident about this strange power. This was definitely a power that could be called a miracle or even a miracle. This power had already displayed its terrifying power when he was refining pills. If someone were to say that this power did not have a high degree of affinity, Lu Feng would not believe it even if he was beaten to death. On the other hand, when he saw the Immortal King's appearance, he suddenly realized that this monstrous genius of an era who was capable of utilizing 5 types of supreme forces was probably not inferior to him at all. In front, the 42 people had already started the test. 42 mental energy was injected into the mental origin crystal that was the size of a house. The mental origin crystal was also constantly emitting different colors in the sky. Seeing the light in the mental origin crystal in the sky, the 11 alchemy grandmasters nodded in satisfaction. This batch is really outstanding, It can be compared to any batch in history. Their friendliness is much, much higher than those from the previous years. Hearing Grandmaster Huang Mu's words, many people gently nodded their heads. Indeed, the affinity of any one of them is very good among those of the same cultivation level. And those monstrous talents are even more so. Almost every one of them is a peak existence. It really isn't easy. There was even a light blue color on the top of the evildoer's head. This faint blue color was very obvious. Although this wasn't the best result in history, it was still a very outstanding and terrifying result in the eyes of history. His results are enough to rank him in the top 10 in history. Yuan Ling, it seems that your youngest disciple is not simple. Grandmaster Ing Taika said slowly as she looked at Yuan Ling, who was silent but had a smug look on his face. Hearing this, Yuan Ling didn't deliberately try to be modest. I have taken in a total of 3 disciples, and he is my youngest and most talented disciple. Now, he's only 55 years old, but he's already a 4th-grade alchemist. Upon hearing this, many of the grandmasters were slightly shocked. They nodded their heads lightly. This talent is really terrifying. A 55-year-old grade 4 pill master. Looking at history, he is definitely one of the peak existences. Hearing this praise, Yuan Ling's face showed a trace of pride. Being praised by ordinary people was nothing to him. After all, in his eyes, even gods were just a few mutated ants. Would he care about these people's praise? Chapter 401. But it was different now, because the people who praised him were all grandmasters, existences on the same level as him. Only their praise could truly make Yuan Ling feel proud. However, this slightly proud expression didn't last long, because in the next moment, that voice of praise sounded again. Unfortunately, he was born in the wrong era. This sentence caused Yuan Ling's smile to completely freeze. He turned around with difficulty and finally saw the person who spoke. Gu Gui, the person who spoke was Gu Gui. Could it be that I'm wrong? Grandmaster Yuan Ling. Gu Gui didn't have the slightest fear towards Yuan Ling. It could be said that the 13 great grandmasters of alchemy didn't have much fear towards each other. They each had their own forces and didn't care about each other's existence. If it wasn't for this, Yu Huayan wouldn't have directly questioned the Grand Elder of the Alchemist Guild, Taratus, in public. Yuan Ling clenched his fists slightly, but in the next moment, he took a deep breath and didn't look at Gu Gui anymore. Seeing this scene, Gu Gui laughed mockingly. If it's just a monster, then he might be able to shine a little as a supporting character. But now, it's a battle between 2 invincible monsters. When people tried to recall the past, they could only remember the battle between the 2 monstrous geniuses. Who would care about those unrelated supporting characters? This was helplessness, but it was also the truth. If it was only one monstrous genius, then the many supporting characters would also leave their names and become recorded existences. However, when 2 monstrous geniuses were born, who would care about them? Who would care about those things? If there were people in the future who remembered it, then they would only remember the battle between the 2 invincible monsters. Who would remember those pitiful supporting characters? The tests of the 42 monsters had all ended. At this time, the gazes of many existences were focused on Lu Feng and the Immortal King. Just as Gu Gui said, when the 2 monsters fought, then all the supporting characters would be sad and wouldn't be paid any attention to. And in front of them, this scene was interpreted. What these people were really paying attention to was the Immortal King, Lu Feng. If it was in the past, then these 42 monstrous geniuses' achievements would be enough to shock the world and cause the crowd to boil with excitement. However, at this moment, under the radiance of these 2 monstrous geniuses, these results that should have been shocking were so dim that they could not attract anyone's attention. The Immortal King looked at Lu Feng and smiled. He slowly said, "Then, let's start our first collision in this unrelated domain. To immortal kings, This was an unrelated domain. In his heart, only the strongest, the one who made him give up on everything and forget about everything else, was the only right path, the only true pursuit. Everything else was illusory and dispensable. Lu Feng also smiled and stretched out his hand, making a modest gesture. As for the immortal king, he didn't hesitate. With a single step, he arrived before the mind origin crystal. Although this is an unrelated path for me. But if I were to fight against you, then it would be irrelevant. I don't want to fail either. The moment his voice fell, the immortal king had already placed his arm on the house-sized mind origin crystal. At this moment, it was truly the focus of hundreds of millions of people. It was the focus of all the alchemy grandmasters' attention. The immortal king didn't feel nervous at all. Slowly, the mental energy that belonged to him slowly appeared. The ink-black mind origin crystal began to slowly change. This meant that the immortal king could refine medicinal pills. Of course, no one doubted that he didn't have the qualifications to refine medicinal pills. After all, how could someone who could cause such a shocking change in the medicine god's square not know how to refine medicinal pills? In the next moment, the black gradually changed, and a faint dark purple color appeared. The purple color didn't stay for long, and it was still changing and fading. In a few breaths' time, a faint blue color appeared. Seeing this faint blue color, a trace of helplessness appeared in Yuan Ling's eyes. In just a few breaths' time, it turned light blue. This proved that the immortal king's mental affinity far surpassed his disciples. Many existences had expected this. They didn't show any surprise on their faces, but they were even more nervous as they watched the changes that might happen next. This was a truly tense moment. 42 monstrous alchemy geniuses, 11 alchemy grandmasters, and more than 100 million martial artists and psychic masters seemed to have forgotten everything. They didn't even make a sound. These people were all motionless as they watched the changes in the mind origin crystal in the sky. As the faint blue color disappeared, a strange look finally appeared in these people's eyes. Light blue was already a relatively extreme color. The next color was the legendary realm that only a few great alchemy grandmasters had reached in this epoch. After a moment, the mind origin crystal indeed changed. That's light red, as expected. The monstrous geniuses of this epoch are indeed monstrous geniuses of this epoch. Ordinary geniuses and monstrous geniuses can't compare to them in any aspect. This kind of discussion didn't appear for long before it stopped. Because while they were discussing, the color of the mind origin crystal changed again. Light red, light red, light yellow, light yellow. Everyone's hearts were beating non-stop. They never knew that there were so many colors after the light red color. One had to know that in the past, light red was already close to the limit of the mind origin crystal. But now, it seemed like it was still very far from the limit. Finally, when it turned milky white, the mind origin crystal stopped changing for a long time. However, everyone could clearly sense that this wasn't the end. Furthermore, looking at the flickering color, it seems that this milky white color still wants to transform even further. It still wants to take the final step of transforming. I understand. The ultimate color of the mind origin crystal should be white. The extreme transformation from black to white, this is the most extreme transformation. Grandmaster Yingtika seemed to have thought of something, a glimmer of light flashing in her eyes. After hearing his words, many of the grandmasters nodded their heads gently. It seems that the limit of an immortal king is white. He should still have a chance to reach the limit. However, do you still remember what the limit of mind origin crystal signifies? Su Ling's expression was incomparably grave as he spoke slowly. Upon hearing his words, the 10 grandmasters, including Taradas, fell into deep thought. But soon, they seemed to have thought of something and trembled all over. There was a look of horror in his eyes. They looked at each other, unable to believe the possibility they'd thought of before. To be able to shock even the grandmasters of Pil Dao was enough to show how terrifying their thoughts were. Su Ling sighed deeply when he saw their gazes. Legend has it that Pil Dao was passed down from the primordial immortal demon era. In that era, there was only one kind of existence that could refine pills, and that was immortal. Immortal, one of the two rulers of the primordial immortal demon era, and publicly acknowledged as the greatest living being. After the end of the primordial immortal demon era, anything related to immortals was undoubtedly a shocking matter that shook the universe. And now they'd thought of something that had the greatest connection to immortals. In the future, there were very few existences that could refine pills. Although there were no psychic professions in the past, there were still many professions that were similar to psychic. They existed in all kinds of cultivation systems. In the records, there were very few people who could refine pills, such as mages, who were similar to psychics who could do so. Like psychics, they could only refine pills when their spiritual power had mutated enough. In other words, they had enough affinity. Su Ling fell silent, and so did many other existences. They thought of an ancient saying, a saying that they were proud of in the world of Pil Dao. Taratus had unknowingly arrived beside the 10 grandmasters of Pil Dao. He let out a long sigh and said slowly, "Legend has it that the end of spiritual power mutation is immortal power." Although they already knew and understood everything, these terrifying almighties who were at the pinnacle of the universe still couldn't help but shudder when they heard this again. Immortal power. The extreme of spiritual power mutation was immortal power. Only with the power of an immortal could one truly refine pills. One had to know that in the primordial immortal demon era, pills weren't called pills. Their name had always been immortal pills. Immortal pills were divine items that only immortals could refine. I once saw a saying in some information of the Alchemist Alliance. That is, immortal power is the only power that can make spiritual power completely transform. Everyone took a deep breath and looked at the immortal king, who was trying his best to change the last color. At this moment, the immortal king's gaze was also directed over, coming into contact with these true almighty existences of the universe. Facing 11 true almighty existences of the universe who could easily kill him millions of times, the immortal king didn't show any fear. He was so natural, as if the people he was looking at were just ordinary mortals. Finally, after looking at the 11 grandmasters for a long time, the immortal king slowly opened his mouth. That's right, the extreme of spiritual power is white. And the only thing that can make spiritual power appear white is immortal power. His voice was not concealed in the slightest. In an instant, it spread throughout the entire area, allowing everyone to hear it. Immortal power. It was actually immortal power. What was immortal? Did immortals really exist? Did the primordial immortal demon era really exist? For countless living beings, these were the answers they were bitterly searching for. But for those true almighty existences, these weren't questions. Because they were certain that immortals really existed. However, immortals, the ultimate existence of all living beings, the supreme terror that reigned above all living beings, had truly been annihilated. Following the unknown end of the primordial immortal demon era, their immortal demon civilization, and countless terrifying experts had completely disappeared. But now, the immortal king actually said such words in front of everyone. He said that the only thing that could make spiritual power transform was immortal power, and he had already reached the final step. Didn't that mean that he possessed immortal power? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.